Hello, everybody. I'm Mike Bizarre. Alan Schimmel is out at Black Hat today, so he won't be on the show with me, but we have an awesome lineup of guests, and we're going to be talking about DevOps and AI. Then we're going to be talking about a little reverse engineering of code using AI. And finally, we're going to have a deep discussion about what it means for Google to be a convicted monopolist. Hey, you're watching Techstrong, gang, and we'll be back in a minute. All right, folks, we're back, and let me introduce our guests for today because we have some new ones. But let's start with Mitch, who is not in Denver today. Mitch, where are you?
I am actually in Las Vegas at Black Hat.
There you go. Which I'm not sure everybody knows what Black Hat is, but it's one of the big security conferences that take place during the course of the year. And of course, we have Amanda Rosani, who's home in Texas, I believe.
Yes, that is correct.
And then finally, our newest guest, Dave Nicholson, is out in California. Dave, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
All right. Dave is with Futorum. And do you have a particular specialty at Futorum, since this is your first time at joining us in the gang?
I think sort of the specialty that I bring is voice of the tech customer, because I'm adjunct faculty in the Wharton CTO Academy. So if I had to be nailed down to something, to a single hat, that would be it. Dave's the guy who talks to CIOs and CTOs every day. That would be me.
All right.
That's an impressive program that you're part of too, David. It's pretty amazing what they do at Wharton with you.
All right. Awesome. So it is fair to say that you are a geek's geek.
Try to be.
All right. Well, let's jump into our first topic because we got a lot of geeky stuff going on today. Our first article that we want to talk about is a new report from Techstrong Research authored by Mitch Ashley. And it goes into, well, what is the level of adoption of AI among DevOps folks and what are we seeing? And I know, Mitch, you authored this report and did all the research. So why don't you kind of walk us through the highlights a little bit?
Well, a bit of a labor of love, because this is actually an update to a report we did in 2022. Techstrong Research did a report about what are the anticipated benefits of AI. That was pre-Gen AI, and then copilots and things were starting to be used, and AI being introduced in some of the DevOps and testing and other kinds of tools. So this gave us a chance to come back and say, okay, now a lot of things have happened, right? The news cycle is about 2 hours these days. So, and it seems like the AI is on a shorter cycle. So it's really interesting. We talked to a variety of people, folks primarily involved in developing software, ranging from architects to engineering leadership to developers and testers, system reliability engineers, platform engineers, et cetera, and trying to understand, so what's happening? Are people seeing any benefit from AI yet and using it anywhere in the SDLC? And there were some really surprising in a way findings, in terms of people that are using it. About 24% said that about 20% said that they're using artificial intelligence in some phases, any one or more of the phases of the software development life cycle. So they're consciously knowing that we're using AI part of our development, part of our testing, part of whatever phase that might be. And at least 24% had at least one phase that they were using in it. But the two standouts, probably not too surprising, were that we're using AI today in writing code and also preventing defects and doing testing. Those are the three standouts, but not that far behind were other areas of the software development lifecycle. I think there were some real eye-openers there. The people who are what we call the more mature phases of DevOps, because we did ask, how long you've been doing DevOps, how would you assess your maturity of DevOps, and how do you see you're performing? Are you assessing your abilities as a DevOps-oriented organization? And those who are using AI and are in the more mature stages of DevOps, we call it adoption. We call it the unicorns, kind of at the very top end. And also people who are standardizing, meaning they've gone through the adoption, they've learned, they're really standardizing DevOps or have standardized it across their organization, rated themselves higher in their performance, or either in the high or medium two categories, as compared to the group who are not using DevOps. So actually not using AI as part of their DevOps. So it's a great report. By the way, it's a very approachable report too. A lot of graphics and content, and you certainly can read it, but you can also skim through it, and there's a highlight section of some of the findings. So that's just a quick recap. But again, labor of love. These things take a little while to get done, and it was a real pleasure publishing it. And Tricentis was the sponsor. They had some input on the questions and give some feedback on the write-up. But the research is ours, so we're happy to be publishing it.
Let me ask you this about it, because what struck me was it seemed like, well, maybe not everybody's using AI just yet, but those that are seem to be rapidly moving it through the entire software development lifecycle. And so once you get into AI, it seems like you kind of want to use it everywhere.
Very, very true. There are some easy entry points. The co-pilots in development is one obvious place because it's already built into many IDEs, and a lot of organizations they're not using it, they're experimenting with it. Like, how much do we use it for code completion, or do we actually generate some code with it as well? So that seems to be the most common entry point. And then, of course, any tools that you're using, like if you're using a testing tool that has AI built into it, if you're using a CI/CD platform, GitHub, for example, repository, whatever you're using, those are also kind of ways that it's introduced into the SDLC. One of the other interesting findings is, I think you kind of know the answer to this, but are we just turning AI loose? Do we just let it do what it's going to do, or do people have to still be in the loop? And very heavily, folks saw that being a human in the loop, looking at the output of AI in any in those places in the SDLC was very important. Just a small fraction said, "Yeah, we kind of let it do what it's doing." I imagine that's not too big a shot doing that from that standpoint. We also looked at productivity. What is the impact on the people, processes, and productivity of people, and how much is it impacting your productivity? How does it help you keep up with the demands? And across the board of the kind of positive ratings, the kind of somewhat more productive, somewhat usually hitting demands, things like that, were pretty substantial. But even those in the significantly in those two categories were also fairly high. There's a middle of the road. We're not seeing an impact yet, but there was very little who were saying it's negative on productivity. And we've heard some things about AI taking more time, particularly if you're using Gen AI for writing or things like that. So it doesn't seem like it's getting in the way or taking people too far off course to introduce it into their development.
David, I think it's fair to say that we are in the hype cycle of AI especially for software development. What's your assessment of what's really going on here? I mean, last year there was probably a lot of what you might call irrational exuberance. So where are we on this actual journey?
I think we're in the if you go sort of down to the lowest levels of the IT stack, I think some rationality has returned. Folks who are making decisions about building these stacks realize that there isn't only a single blessed way to accomplish what they want to accomplish in the world of AI. So I think that there will be a lot of realignment of players in this space. NVIDIA, of course, is going to dominate, again, diving down to the lower part of the stack. So I think we're in sort of the place where we start to get more rational about these conversations. But on AI for DevOps in particular, it's important always when we use either if the TLA is a 2-letter acronym or a 3-letter acronym, that we sort of define what we're talking about. Because yes, AI, artificial intelligence. Well, that's a big umbrella. People immediately leap to this concept of generative AI, autoregressive generative AI, because we're so familiar with it at the consumer level. So people hear AI and DevOps, and the conclusion they generally leap to is, oh, you've got this engine that's going to generate code by the use of plain language. Computer. I shouldn't say that because my device will go off here. Sorry. I have my Alexa programmed for that. Had done plug. Little Star Trek reference there. So, you say computer. write me a software program with a caterpillar that catches butterflies. And the system, oh, okay. It goes out and it generates the code. That's not really where we are now. To Mitch's point, if you go back in history, we called it pair programming. Now you have an artificial co-pilot with you at your shoulder, sort of making suggestions, but the person is very much in charge of the tool. But the vast majority of AI that's happening in DevOps today and everywhere, frankly, is what we would call sophisticated machine learning and automation. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's awesome. It's where it's going to begin. I guess my final thought on AI is, much like cloud, I think at some point in the not too distant future, we're just not going to talk about AI. It's all going to be considered IT. Just like cloud is IT. It's all IT. It's information technology. Yes, what we're doing in AI is revolutionary to a degree, but really it's just the next thing in information technology development.
Yeah, it's interesting you place it that way, because one of the things we discussed is, what do we title this report? Is it AI and DevOps? Is it software generated code with AI? And we stayed with the AI augmented DevOps, because it's not AI in the driver's seat. It's the co-pilot, or it's behind the scenes.
Yes.
It's, like your pair programming example, I'm going to look at the code, because we don't have code generators that we know generate better quality code or more secure code, things like that, more reliable code. So there's, we're relying on some general LLMs to aid us, at least in terms of generative AI and the code writing. There's a long ways to go. And that's part of the theme of the report is, here's the impact we're seeing so far, but we're at the beginning of all this. This is
augmentation. I love augmented, because at some point it almost becomes absurd for us as humans to say that, well, it's me augmented. It's like, no, dude, you were driving a freight train. The freight train was towing everything along the tracks. It's like, no. It was just augmenting my strength. It's like,
well, I should say no AI was harmed in the making of this report, just so we're all clear.
So I had a question in regard to the report, and Mike and I were talking about this yesterday in our podcast. It was another report that we were reviewing, but it was saying while AI was increasing efficiency, in fact, what it was doing was causing more burnout in a lot of employees, because they had more of a workload because of the efficiency. They had so much more of a workload, their brain capacity couldn't really handle it. So they were struggling from burnout. So what are your thoughts on this?
It's a great question. It's not something we looked directly at, Amanda. And I'm familiar with that report too, of, just trying to figure out how to use AI, create more workload on top of trying to get what we're done in the first place. So are you having a net productivity gain? When we saw what the changes in people's work, productivity was the first thing that they kind of pointed out, and real closely for developers as well as for test teams. So which tends to be, that's I don't want to say they're the bottlenecks, but that's kind of two of the things that are essential to get code, get software developed and get it out the door. There's a lot of other elements as well. And they did say fewer resources, full-time people, things like that. But we started kind of falling off on what are the changes to people's jobs. So I think there's a lot of shakeout to do yet. And I've never been a believer of, the cloud is going to replace everybody's job. No, it replaced people that hung machines on racks. It didn't replace people doing work. Same thing for AI. I think it's largely augmenting what we do. I'd love to have LLMs. We're not here. LLMs that help us reduce technical debt. If we had an LLM to do that, turn that loose on all those things that the developers don't want to go back, or helping us figure out what those systems do, that the people that wrote them are long gone and we're afraid to touch those parts of the applications. I think there's some real productivity gains there. So bottom line, we didn't look at that specifically, but I didn't see anything in the data that I got that sense that people are, if anything, they're maybe trying to figure out where the best cases in their applications are to use AI. That's where there's new work. I would look
at this productivity question. I would ask Amanda, you see this, you're familiar with the mobile device, obviously. Does this give you more freedom, or is it a ball and chain? Right?
Oh,
it's like I can work. I can work from anywhere. I have to work from everywhere. I think those AI tools are going, there's going to be a mixed bag as we go forward with that. An individual developer inevitably will be able to be more productive if they let that bury them, like some people let their mobile devices bury them. It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough.
Of course, your mileage may vary if you're asking my family versus me, right?
David,
you're absolutely right. Good point there.
David, let me just ask you one last question here. It seems like one of the things that's in this survey that leapt out at me was only 9% or so of the folks are, totally trusting the output of these Gen AI platforms. So have we reached a point where, it's great. I got a little tool. It's going to help me do something a little bit faster, but the reality of it is it's not this end-to-end magical button. It is a thing that helps us get something started, but it won't complete nearly any task. Or if we let it complete any task, we should look at it really hard.
Yeah. Let's say you're using a tool like this. How many times does it have to be wrong for you to say, this is a waste of my time? Now I'm proofreading the work of a kindergartner. This doesn't make sense. Eventually people will start to trust it. There's a parallel with driving aids, self-driving systems in vehicles. It's the same sort of thing. It's one thing, hey, straight highway, I have a 3-hour monotonous drive. You very quickly will trust the system. Try driving that same car with the same system in stop-and-go traffic, in a construction zone on a rainy day. It doesn't take too many, whoa, what were you doing, for you to say, forget about this, and turn the system off. So I think there are going to be fits and starts as we go, but it's going to be an upward slant to adoption. There will be people who will try it, say, forget this, I'll come back later. There will be people who stick with it because they're early adopters, but over time, more and more people will learn to trust it as it gets better and better.
Hey, David, a question for you. This is a big question, but are there any highlights you can share of what are the conversations about AI in the program at Wharton that you're part of? What are the things that are bubbling up to the surface?
Well, it's sort of funny. I'd say going back 6-12 months ago, a lot of the conversation was, and I'm being silly, but I'm serious. This is the way that the conversation goes. The CIO says, I'm really, really upset that we fired all of our people who could be doing work on this stuff on premises in favor of moving everything we do to the cloud, because now we have no data center muscle. We have no one who can come in and create something that will be a unique value proposition in the world of AI. We're a slave to the cloud providers. We can't even buy NVIDIA GPUs if we can get our hands on them. And the thing that makes me the most mad is that I'm the one who fired all those people. That's their thing. They're realizing, oh, wow, if I had known what I know now, maybe I would have held into reserve some of this smarts internally. So that's one dynamic. But then the other is the what I alluded to earlier, this idea that people are realizing, wait a minute, maybe you don't need the Ferrari highest end NVIDIA GPU based infrastructure, completely integrated stack. Maybe I don't need that for everything. Maybe I don't need it for anything. People are just learning the difference between inference and training. We focus a lot on training. People don't realize that in aggregate, there's going to be way more inference than there will be training. It's just training is concentrated into these mega clusters. So I think that's a good sampling. There's a lot of other stuff. Oh, and the final thought I would say is, because I work with folks on their papers that they're writing over the course of the year on what they're doing with AI, and I would say 80% of it, we would all look at it and we would say, yeah, that's AI. It's ML. It has nothing to do. It's machine learning. Which is great. It has nothing to do with generative AI, not yet in some of these cases. And that's perfectly fine. Not everything has to be the sexy, shiny, new object for it to be valuable.
All right, folks, we can talk about this probably for the entire show, but we
continue, Mike. Thank you.
we have to move on to our other segments. I would just conclude with, remember that thing about trust, right? It's hard to win and easily lost. We'll be back in a minute. All right, we're back, and Mitch kind of brought this up in the first segment when he was talking about technical debt, and there's now a whole movement afoot to kind of reverse engineer a lot of the existing code that's out there. DARPA has a project where they want to turn C and C++ code into Rust, which is said to be a more secure language because it doesn't leave so much stuff visible in memory. And then we also have an article on Techstrong AI talking about the rise of software intelligence, which is kind of like business intelligence for software, where we're going to do a lot more analytics and understanding how the software is constructed so that we can change it or reverse engineer it when the time comes. I'm going to start with Mitch. We've been hearing a lot about this stuff, about you rewriting entire applications into different languages. Folks are doing COBOL to Java. Other folks are trying to convert things into Go or whatever it might be. From your perspective, is this going to be like a major trend? Is this the new face of application modernization?
Well, I think it's a thread through that process. Very few organizations are going to go say, let's go back and rewrite everything in blah to Rust, for example. But they may say, going forward, here's what we want to start using. I'll use AWS as an example. They made a conscious decision a few years back about what they want to develop their software in, and they chose Rust. I love Rust, different band, different topic. But for a couple of reasons, C and C++.
Geddy Lee is a programmer, right?
Love Geddy Lee. Absolutely. Love all three of them. Yeah, and you remember the days we used to talk about C++ and C of, there's memory leaks, right? There's things happening, processes would run amok and take over and have to get killed and restarted and things like that. There's a lot of housekeeping that you have to do in those traditional languages, object-oriented or not. And then we kind of shift to the other end of the spectrum where we used to use Perl heavily. Now we use a lot of Python. And any number of programming languages which take a lot of that housekeeping away from you, and it's easier to develop in. It's much more approachable. But they don't have things that Rust has. Rust has what they call type safety, meaning this variable is an integer and it will always be an integer and it can never become something else so that it doesn't get exploited and get SQL injected into it. Just a really simple example. It also has memory protections, and that's one of the biggest features because once we're running code, it's not, sitting on the disk, it's running in the memory of a computer, and it's both susceptible to being attacked, but also to getting into other parts of the system, into the operating system or other parts of the application. And one of the big pushes around AI is how do I protect my data that AI is using, whether it's generative AI, machine learning, et cetera, all the way down to the chip level. So I don't want code that's running in a processing unit where it's a GPU or IPU or CPU that's also co-processing AI type data to share that memory together. So there's a lot of focus on all the way down to the hardware level, which has a lot of implications for the programming languages that you use. So long explanation, but I went into that because it is important. We could reach a day where what are you doing to, programs that you're writing to add memory protections, to add type safety and things like that? I don't think we're there yet, maybe except for defense and government kind of contracts, but I think we're headed down that path.
David, are CIOs talking about technical debt and these issues, or are they just kind of pretending they don't exist?
Well, which ones? The ones who are just about to get fired, they ignore it. They ignore it. They figure CIO stands for careers over, and it just doesn't matter. No, part of what we talk about as the CTO mindset, which has to be incorporated into every CIO's role, is this idea of ambidextrous management. You have finite resources, you have infinite demands put upon you, and what do you have to do? You have to do two things at once. You have to keep the lights on, manage technical debt, and you have to innovate. You have to run the business, you have to change the business. You have to do these things at the same time. So technical debt is always a nightmare, and it's often either because of budgetary concerns or because of technical reasons. It's the friction that prevents a lot of innovation from happening. But I think that I think Mitch, Freudian slip here, because I think of DARPA as sort of being akin to the priests at the Temple of Syrinx. I don't know how big of a Rush fan you are, but that's a Rush reference.
Oh, yes.
From 2112. The point is, I want transparency and visibility into the transmogrification of code. If what we're saying is, hey, we're going to create this centralized government agency, we're going to go back and we're going to rewrite all of this code for your safety. I want visibility into that system. Not that I don't trust. Trust was alluded to earlier, but I don't trust.
That's the Tom Sawyer of the picture who's talking other people into, let's go rewrite everything.
Right. So I get it. It makes sense. I would like to see a focus on control system software, frankly. And I plead ignorance. I don't know. I don't know the frameworks that are generally used there, but the kinds of things that control valves and switches in electrical grids and water systems, those need to be hardened. I think that would be a great place to go if the constitutional things we ask our government to do are provide for the common defense and support the general welfare. I say let's harden our infrastructure first before we go out and transmogrify code. A little bit of a tangent there, but
so a lot of people watching this. Sorry, a lot of people watching this show are now running prog rock lyrics through ChatGPT to understand what you guys are referring to.
Renaming all my variables to brush lyrics. So just a little perspective on technical debt. There are different estimates of this, but you can find how many lines of code are in existence that are still running today, and the numbers are like 5 trillion, and literally that's some of the estimates. So it's really crazy. Every line of code written that you aren't working on is technical debt. So that's how big technical debt is. I mean, you may have not have touched it for 5 years, you may have touched it for a month, but every one of those lines of code you have to maintain is technical debt. So we are building this problem, higher. The mountain's getting taller and taller, right? It's not shrinking.
Well, about technical debt, I posted an article a few days ago, George Holm wrote, and it was an interesting use case about a company that just decided to get rid of all the technical debt, just wipe it all clean, start fresh, put in all new and completely digitally transform. And it worked well for them. It was a great return on investment. So I would love to hear your thoughts on, should business leaders be trying to just get rid of all that and start fresh? In the end, is it a better return on investment?
I'm curious, Amanda, kind of when I've run IT and development organizations, you build up all of these things that we should do. And at one point it was a good idea. And oftentimes it's just like, that's actually, even if we did that, it wouldn't be helpful. So you kind of cull out, 2/3 of the debt that you think you have to do. Did they go through a process like that to really figure out what's meaningful to fix and let's just shed the rest?
Yes. Yeah. It was, it was a whole planning process. And in the end, it worked well for them. I don't know if it would work for all companies to just wipe all their technical debt out and start fresh.
David, IT budgets, in my experience, are kind of like bills running through Congress, and like everybody attaches all kinds of stuff to them. And so how many CIOs do you think are going to say, we're launching an AI initiative and we need this amount of money to go do that? And then they're going to pull in all this technical debt cleanup effort underneath that because, well, who's going to check a line item?
Well, I don't know if this tracks with what you're saying, but I'm constantly admonishing folks that I work with that it's very easy to adopt the saying that, well, we're considering AI for everything. Our AI strategy is important. It's sort of like a few years ago when people would proudly say, we have a cloud first policy here, which to me sounds like, I'm a mechanic, I have a screwdriver first policy. It's like, oh, really? So if you see a bolt on the end of a screw, first on a nut on a screw, I'm going to try a screwdriver first. Why wouldn't you use a wrench? You look at it, that's a wrench job, not a. No. We always use try cloud first. Come on, fit for function. So in this case, I don't know. I think that people, what I admonish people to do is pay attention to the things that they think are not important. The CIO doesn't have to care about the storage systems, but in the environment, as an example, refreshing them. But someone in the CIO's organization needs to. Because if you optimize infrastructure, if you take your eye off the infrastructure ball, you're not going to have budget for AI. So by focusing on the things that aren't cool, you free up budget in this finite resources, infinite demands world that they live in. So long way to get to the point. Focus on the boring stuff to free up capital for the cool stuff. And just really quickly, because Mitch tossed out 5 trillion, numbers like that are impossible to conceive. Right. But I have an example just to help the audience. So this is 100 trillion Zimbabwe dollars. So hopefully that helps.
Wow.
To get your arms around what the numbers are.
You're a rich man. I don't know what it's worth.
I think this is worth $1.
Okay.
I think part of the issue here with technical debt, though, is I think more people will rewrite code for the following reason: is the people who wrote that COBOL program from 30 years ago are sitting on a beach somewhere, and they're not going to help me come fix it. Or if they do, they're going to charge me a fortune. So how many C-level folks are thinking through the fact that there's just a lot of stuff that they're trying to run from bygone days that there's nobody around who remembers how it works?
I'll share one experience like that, Mike. I took over a SaaS product that runs about 93 million transactions a year, doing kind of service locator type functionality. It had been written in ASP.NET several years back. People that wrote it are long gone. And there were major sections of the code that we were just afraid to touch because nobody understood it, nobody what to do with it. And so when we looked at moving to the cloud and modernizing it, rewriting it was just not impractical. I tried that earlier in my career and I managed to survive those mistakes and still here. But what we did was look at, let's take the whole monolith application and say, what parts of it really does the business need to be able to add more things to it? What flexibility do we need? Where do we need more agility to be able to modify this quickly? And there was one area of the product that really most of the business needs were being asked for. There were hundreds of things across the whole app. So that's the part that we moved to microservices and use containers and Kubernetes and tried to use a more flexible approach so we could add and update it much more quickly. Saved a ton of money. It turned out to be a successful strategy in that case. But that's only because we were able to pinpoint what parts of this do we change. So unless you've got something that's so antiquated, you need to really rethink and write the app. It's hard to justify, let's put this into Rust. Let's put this into microservices. All those are tough decisions unless you're just backed into a corner. You don't have an option.
Yeah. David, who makes a fortune on technical debt? Global system integrators. They kind of launch these projects and then they show up and they move in for a couple of years and then they announce that they have either succeeded or they just throw up their hands and say sorry, but they don't give you your money back.
Always declare victory. Always declare victory.
And sell the next contract, right?
That's right. So yeah, one quick example that's we're experiencing in real time in terms of technical debt and friction associated with it. VMware. Look at the bluster. People are frustrated. Broadcom comes in, and clearly Broadcom's going to ride the long tail of VMware into the future. If people could snap their fingers and move to something else, they would, largely. In a lot of cases, people would do that, but you can't because of the friction associated with change. And so technical debt actually is opportunity for global systems integrators, companies that want to take on these very sticky portfolios of technical debt. It's a mixed bag.
I'll tell you one thing I am optimistic about all this, because to your point about that, the cost of switching IT platforms is just way too high. And if we can rely on AI tools to reduce that by making it easier to take some platform that has some dependencies that are designed to lock you in and then reverse engineer that into something that is more generic code that can run anywhere, I think the level of competition across the IT industry is about to dramatically increase. Now, David, am I engaging in some wishful thinking?
Well, you could. There's. Let's see. I jumped into the multiverse just for a moment while you were proposing this, and one possible path I saw was with all of your good intentions, where we ended up was almost a pharmaceutical industry model where developers in IT had to use patent protection so that they could get enough profit to warrant the work they did to do the development. I was part of something called the Open Data Center Alliance. I don't even know, more than a decade ago. And what the Open Data Center Alliance customers said was, I want perfect substitutions for everything that I do in IT. I want the best functionality that the market can deliver. And I want to be able to grind all of your heads together in a price war to get you down to the lowest common denominator. It's like, well, where does that leave room for innovation, really, when there's no profit motive in differentiating? So it can go sideways. But I agree. I mean, the promise of cloud was supposed to be portability. We still don't see a lot of people moving stuff back and forth. But yes, to the extent we could drive friction out of the system, everyone benefits.
So you're basically saying I will not see a generic version of my IT platform that I can go buy for a nickel.
I don't think so. Not one that you want to buy for a nickel. Not one that's worth a nickel. Yeah.
Don't throw those COBOL skills away, Mike, quite yet.
Don't throw them away. They're getting more valuable every day.
We just had a show talking about how we're training kids to write COBOL programs because that's where the money is, although all the cool kids think the other languages are cool. But hey, somebody's got to make money, and if everybody's using AI to write code, maybe you should learn COBOL because AI might not learn that as quickly. Yep. We will see how all this plays out in the future, but stay tuned as we continue to talking about our next section, which is, well, Google has joined, shall we say, an elite club, and we'll dive into what that means in a minute. We'll be right back.
Discover Techstrong Group, the epicenter of tech innovation. We're your go-to for reaching IT leaders and practitioners worldwide. Our secret? Impactful content that sparks awareness, engagement, and top-quality leads. With us, you'll access editorial websites, streaming videos, virtual events, custom content, analyst research, and more. Join our satisfied clients. Let's revolutionize your tech journey. Contact us today and tell your story to the world in the most powerful way with Techstrong Group.
All right, folks, as we described, Google is now a convicted monopolist. And, well, I can't make up my mind if they should be congratulated for the fact that they managed to create this situation and they have enough market share to dominate. And from a investor perspective, maybe that's very impressive. On the other side of it, it's clear that if they eventually wind up losing the 27 appeals that will probably go through before this thing gets resolved, what are the implications of all that from a business perspective? David, what are you hearing about this case? I mean, it's been around forever, and I think everybody forgot about it. And then one morning we woke up and there was a ruling.
Yeah, and it's not just this case. There have been many other cases brought in state and federal court coming after them. I don't know why the phrase "convicted monopolist" makes me laugh, but I don't know why. But it just cracks me up. So please don't say it because I won't be able to keep a straight face. But let's take a quick step back here. What are the point of these antitrust rules? The point is to protect consumers. The idea is if in a healthy economy, you shouldn't have someone with so much control that they can artificially control prices, artificially put a damper on competition. That hurts consumers. There's nothing illegal about being a monopolist. That's why it's kind of funny to say convicted monopolist. You can have a monopoly if it's a natural monopoly. If it's like, look, and this is what Google argues. They say, look, our search engine is better. That's all. That's why people use it. The pushback is, well, the fact that your search engine is the best, if we stipulate that, it got you to a point where, unfortunately, with nefarious intent or not, you started to leverage that power in a way that is anti-competitive. That's what's been asserted and confirmed by the court in this case. Now, search engine is directly tied to another lawsuit or several other suits having to do with ads because those are inextricably tied together because search is how ads are presented and the two go hand in glove. So the real question is, how do consumers benefit if the government intervenes to say, Google, you must implement the following policies to prevent these anti-competitive behaviors from happening moving forward? So what does that look like? Well, something like 95% of mobile devices have as their default browser, or search, default search engine is going to be Google. And that doesn't happen by accident. And so behind the scenes, the question is Google exerting too much pressure? You look another layer down, and guess who's driving a lot of this? Is it me and you as a consumer? Are we really that upset about it? Or is it the competitors of Google? Is it the Microsofts of the world that are pushing back? And generally, that's part of the dynamic. And then my final cynical Dave view on this is that Google just hasn't been effective enough at lobbying. They're not greasing the right palms in the way that they need to. Essentially, this is a bit of a shakedown exercise. And I'm sure you're going to see Google participate even more in political elections, local, state, and federal moving forward. But does breaking up Google help us like the consent decree that broke up AT&T for myself? Probably the only one old enough to remember it on this call. The Baby Bell operating systems came out of that. It was chaotic at first, but I think in the end, more choice for consumers came out of breaking up the phone company. And but I just don't know what that would look. I'd love to hear Amanda and Mitch what you think about what would it look like. What would the world look like if the government came in and said, we're breaking up Google? I mean, what does that mean?
Yeah, I posted about this news when it came out. Yesterday was a huge news day in the world, I tell you. But when that news came out, I was shocked because I was thinking, what does this do to the stock market? First of all, it's already starting off badly. And then if big tech, all the other big tech lawsuits that are yet to come, what is that going to do? But anyway, when I posted that, the responses I got were that they were shocked. That was crazy. Google was the best search engine there was. I agree. I use Google the most as a search engine. So if it gets taken away on people's phones or devices, I don't think it's the consumers that were complaining. We like Google, other than some people don't like the censorship on it so much, but it is the best search engine. And so anyway, that's what I'm hearing. I don't know what y'all heard, but I definitely don't think it was a consumer complaint about Google, other than, like I said, some of the censorship.
You know what I was surprised by, and Mitch, I will get your opinion on this because, I'm going way old school here, but you remember payola? Mm-hmm. So let me get this straight. Google is paying Apple a significant amount of sum for the privilege of being the default search engine on their platforms, and they're paying other folks similarly. wasn't that part of the thing? So, is it Google who's really being at fault here, or is it Apple for taking the money from Google and, because that's part of the payola?
It is every business's objective to monetize what they create, what their advantages are in market. The question is, do you take it too far? And to David's point, where you exhibit anti-competitive behaviors. So are you doing price fixing or collusion with others in the market? Are you controlling something so much about your product that limits what others can do it? So you become so popular as search engine. Now you not only cut others out of search, but you cut others out of other parts of their business. And if that's substantial enough, the real thing that comes out of this, we're not in the days of the baby bells, which I went through that too, David. Very interesting time. Standard Oil, right? Breaking up Standard Oil. That's one of the, landmark monopoly cases. It isn't being declared a convicted monopolist, which I got that title from playing Monopoly, but not from running one. It's what the consequences are. And we live in an age where the real negotiation is, yes, we appeal it, but what are we going to have to do as a result of it? We'll change this in the algorithm. We'll change this of making it easier sort of for people to choose what search engine they use in the browser. We'll do these things about how ads are. That's where the rubber meets the road, and the outcome of this, very unlikely, they'll go to court and say, okay, we're going to break ABC up into these 5 companies and do that kind of an impact. So I think at the end of the day, and sometimes these changes that they make are so esoteric that the normal consumer don't know it. Like, for example, Microsoft had to make in part of their agreement with an EU, and one of the challenges that they faced was giving others direct access to certain things in the operating system. Well, they don't have to do that in the US, but they have to do that there. So it gets a bit esoteric, and I don't think for most of it, we're going to see, they're not going to take our browser away, to your search engine away, Amanda. Most consumers probably won't even ever see what the consequences of this are. And a lot of money will be spent by some very wealthy lawyers.
Yeah, I think Amanda brings up a good point about the political angle on this. Yes, censorship. There are a lot of people who see Google as the bottleneck for all information globally, and that control is frightening from a democracy perspective. And so I think that then percolates up, at least through the legislature. Now we're talking judiciary, we're talking about civil suits and things brought by the administrative branch of government. But yeah, don't underestimate the fact that everyone has seen the AI generated images of what appear to be African Nazis. It's like, wait, what? And so anything that smells like bias that's being injected into our lives front and center, that gets people fired up too. So that's definitely a dynamic.
Do you think people will take a minute to think about, Amanda was talking about Google as being, the best search engine experience. Well, I would argue Google maybe is the best of a bad lot. Search engine experience has just gotten worse and worse over the years. It's basically now, 5-6 ads before you get to the actual thing you're searching for. And Google's been playing around with this algorithm for the last year where it's trying to, quote unquote, find more helpful content that's more timely. But when I go look at the search results, I don't really see that. I see the same old junk at the top of the list that's from 2 years ago. And I might be clicking through now to the third window before I find what I'm looking for during a search engine. So I got to say, all this stuff about how great the Google search experience is, I'm kind of like scratching my head going, well, maybe it's time to get rid of this thing with something better. And maybe we should just go to this AI thing that knows better about what I'm looking for. Have search engines kind of outlived their usefulness? David, I'll let you jump on that grenade.
Yeah. So I think that if you ask people at Google, they would tell you that, look, all of this effort is misplaced. We at Google are terrified that we're going to lose our position of dominance. We know about this idea of disruptive technology and that something is nipping at our heels. I've always been curious, and maybe there's a way to get this answer somewhere, but what's the value of having access to free search, how much would it cost for me to have no ads, no Google intervention in terms of the ranking of items? What we're seeing is not someone coming up with a better Google version of Google, but no. Generative AI with RAG, with retrieval augmented generative AI, where I ask a question and I just get the answer. I don't get ads. I don't get things ordered based on some priority that's giving money somewhere else. But I pay $20 a month, $50 a month to have this very, very effective tool. I think that Google has, frankly, painted themselves into a corner. To your point, you've got to go down 20 hits deep to get something that isn't an ad promoted result. So I agree. I mean, we say it's the best. It is, but yeah, best what? It's like, you know what it is? It's the exit row on a Southwest Airlines flight, right? It's like, hey, I'm the president of a third world country. Great. Good for you. And so I think that the disruptive technology is going to come from the AI space. It's going to be chat-based things where not only are the search results coming in just boom, 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 but there's some logic wrapping them all together. I think that's where the disruption is going to happen. I think that disruption will happen way more quickly than any legislation can affect change.
I agree with you. I don't know if you had this experience on your phones, but I've noticed the last month or so, I use Siri a lot, and that's kind of my search engine on my phone. I'll just ask Siri, and then the AI will, scour the internet and give me back a response right away, which I have often found helpful. Now, sometimes it's not the response or I need more in-depth information, but I like that little AI response at the top when I ask. Have y'all experienced that yet?
I do use Siri for that. Not all the time.
I think Siri is sort of is sort of Alexa's sibling that just wasn't blessed with the mental acuity that Alexa was blessed with. But yeah, I do use Siri, but I'm more often frustrated by her because I use Alexa so much, and there seems to be a greater depth there. I have a feeling it's going to be hopscotch. Next gen stuff coming from Apple, I think, is going to address that. I think we're going to see logarithmic increase in its capability.
And I think they both need to go to a different school, get some more training, right? So we talk about the best. Oftentimes the best is the most familiar. That's why we're very comfortable with Google and how it works. And we already know how to do prompt engineering that we talk about in generative AI. We do prompt engineering every day when we type Google search. We have a way we know that we'll get the results, for certain things if we use it for that often enough. So to your point, Dave, if something else is truly easier and gets me equal or better results, just easier to use, okay, now you might be talking about displacing or at least competing with it. So,
yeah, that's a brilliant insight. That what's the easiest UI? Well, it's the one you already know how to use, of course. Yeah. Right? There's no easier than that.
Command line was the best experience when that's all we had.
Right.
DOS.
All right. So I'm looking forward to reading the filing that goes something like this. Your Honor, we have messed up this product so much that the experience is so horrible that there's no way we could have a monopoly because there's all these new AI technologies that are about to replace it, because that's essentially the defense.
Their defense will be, yes, there's a ton of competition in the market. In fact, we're not even sure how we're going to pay our rent next quarter because who knows what's going to happen. But look, the numbers at this point show their dominance. But those numbers in and of themselves don't make you guilty. That's the thing. They can have 95% market share as long as they're not abusing the power that they have deservedly achieved. And that's a gray area. That's where I go down to sometimes the tipping point is how well you've lobbied Congress or not. Literally the elections in the fall could make a big difference in the way that these things sort of go in terms of scrutiny, who gets scrutinized and who doesn't. But yeah, I think in the long run, we are going to benefit from AI in this case. The challenge is in both cloud and everything associated with search and AI. These are the highest barriers to entry in the history of humanity in terms of business. This isn't, you want to compete with the chicken restaurant down the street. It's going to cost you $300,000 to get your business up and running. Ooh. No. This is like, how could you possibly say, if Mitch and I decided we were going to come up with our own version of AWS, everybody, I'd pitch in 100 trillion Zimbabwe dollars, and then we'd need to raise a lot. It's an insurmountable barrier to entry. Only a government, frankly, could do it. So that's kind of the difference here. When you get to the scale of something like Google, who can mount a front? Well, guess what? It's going to be the chat, the chat version. There's a recent one there's one that's popular for search.
DuckDuckGo, which uses Bing on the back end, by the way.
Yeah, but specifically, it's touted as a Chat GPT like engine for search, where Chat GPT, OpenAI is saying, no, we're not trying to be Google search. That's not us. That's beneath us. But there is. I should have it on the tip of my tongue. People are starting to reference it. I'm starting to get links from this search engine, if you will, which is an AI-driven search engine.
By the way, I see your 100 trillion Zimbabwe dollars, and I raise you 8 quadrillion. There we go. Okay, I'm outdone. I should never. I've learned never bet against.
Amanda, you're worried about what the market does. Just give me a call. I got you covered. I just got these $9.
We're going to close this up here now on two thoughts. One is, all you folks in Zimbabwe who are angry, direct your email to David. And then the second thing is, hey, just remember, a couple of decades ago, we were all flipping out about the dominance of Microsoft. And now look at the world today. There's Mac OSs everywhere. Linux dominates in the server side. And we are all using Google apps in the cloud rather than Microsoft Office on your desktop. So the world is changing, and it will change, and the market will decide and vote with its feet. Folks, I want to thank you all for being on the show, and I want to thank you all for watching the show today. We'll be back with some additional content for Techstrong TV, so stay tuned.
I'm Bonnie Schneider, sustainability contributor to the Techstrong Group. I'm excited to introduce you to a groundbreaking new initiative from Techstrong Research, the Sustainability Pulse Meter. The Pulse Meter offers valuable insights into how environmental responsibility factors into tech purchasing decisions for key players in the industry. Position your company as a leader in the industry and differentiate from your competitors with the Sustainability Pulse Meter, offered exclusively from Techstrong Research.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey everyone, welcome back here to Techstrong TV. I got first time on, new company to introduce you to, very excited. I want to introduce you to Ari Zilka. Ari is the founder and CEO of a company called My Decisive. First of all, Ari, welcome to Techstrong TV. It's great to have you here.
It's great to be here. I'm super excited. Thank you for your time.
No, thank you. Thank you. We're here every day. You're the one dragging you in. But anyway, Ari, as I often like to do with these things, I like to give people a sense. Everybody has the dream of being a founder, of starting their own company, of, reaching the top of the mountain, raising money and exiting or going public. And it's all very sexy, but the day in, day out, minute by minute, hour by hour is more like a war. And people always say, how did he do it? How did she do it? Give people a sense maybe of your journey here, how you came to be the founder CEO of My Decisive.
Sure, happy to. I am here through a long path, almost 30 years, that traverses open source, it traverses data management, and it traverses large-scale production systems. I think one of my investors put it best, like the reason I was able to get funding to get where I'm at is that I represent 3 experience sets, right? And I love, this was one of the founders of one of the big VCs on Sound Hill Road. He's like, I like you, Ari, because you sold other people's software in your past. So I used to work at like Sapient, Price Waterhouse, and do big consulting gigs.
Those are big. Those are names I haven't heard in a bit. Sapient.
Yeah. Then I sold other people's software. I built my own. So Terracotta, Cache, Hortonworks,
Really?
New Relic, Walmart.com, founding chief architect. And so I've built my own, and I've run big production systems like Walmart. So at the time I was at Walmart, it was the #2 e-com site in the world.
I think it still might be, no? Or it's got to be in the top 5.
It might be. It's definitely top 5, but we were in year 2000 doing 1 billion page impressions a day. And that's really where I got my focus on data. So we were paying Oracle too much money. I decided, let's go. We were mostly open source. I didn't decide, but I took the open source we were using and started bending it and twisting it to get to crazy scale. And that led to Terracotta, which led me to hang out with the open source gang, which led me to Hortonworks, which led me to try my hand at VC. I was at Khosla Ventures as a partner for a while. And so how did I get here? It's good news, bad news. The good news is work hard and you get rewarded. Right. Do what you love, you get to do it in the big time. The bad news is it's sort of an in the family kind of thing. Like I got a couple of jobs through pure grit and then ended up in a place where I was inside the family, and people are super helpful to me at this point.
But you know what? That's not unique either, right?
Right.
It is about network. I mean, look, we'd like to think we live in this meritocracy where, everyone gets treated equal. Every idea you send into a VC gets looked at, with due diligence and the time it deserves. The fact of the matter is it's still a lot of who you know. And it's not just a Silicon Valley thing. It's just a world of business thing.
Yeah, it is.
And you know what I like about it, though, Ari? Because so many people think, founding a startup is something for 20-something or early 30-something-year-olds, right? Because, what is a guy in his 40s or 50s know? But yet, and I've seen studies on this, founders who are a little more seasoned, who are a little more experienced, who have the kind of resume you have, can do a better job. Right? It's not like they suffer from a lack of ideas, but they also have a ton of experience. And, there was a time where some VCs, I think definitely, I don't want to use the word discriminated, but definitely preferred, younger, first-time entrepreneurs. But I think that's changed. I think people realize. Right?
Totally.
People with experience do it. So I wasn't always on this side. I was on that side of the camera a lot in my life too. I've started several venture-backed companies, co-founded.
Right on.
And I've been interviewing and talking to entrepreneurs for a long time. Everyone I know who started a company, Ari, thinks that in some small way, their company is going to make the world better, make someone's life better. And they're passionate. They're passionate about what they're doing. What's the passion behind My Decisive?
Oh, wow. I love that question. So look, I haven't defined My Decisive. Let me define it quickly.
Go ahead. Good.
Using super geeky terminology, it's composable observability. In essence, observability just went through an inflection point. New Relic, Datadog, Dynatrace, big public companies. One of them went private recently. Customers are paying millions of dollars a year each for this technology, for this value prop. Observability, if you look at the debate about its definition, it's very much defining a state of a system, a quality of a system. I can observe without knowing the source code, without editing the system. And that's very passive to me. I want to flip to active. Why do I want to flip to active? Now I can answer your question. So if I want to flip to active because data matters, okay? And specifically, Oracle, Sybase, these guys, Postgres, these guys, Ingress, these guys grew up taking control and making real easy, low-cost, commoditized use of business state. Sales orders, customer orders, inventory state. They know financial transactions. They record the state of the money and the people and the processes. Then came Hadoop, big data. I was part of that movement. We were basically taking this log data that Splunk made super popular. We were turning it into understanding, value, right? Now you have two pillars of data. You have the business processes in Oracle. You have the user behavior in big data in Hadoop, in data lakes. And it tells you Ari's worth more than so-and-so because he will tend to buy more and more and more from you. That analytic couldn't be done in Oracle, so here comes Hadoop. There's a third pillar of data, and New Relic and Datadog missed it. That third pillar of data is telemetry data. It's the behavior of your systems. So you've got your processes, you've got your users, and you've got your systems. And all you could do with observability vendors is push all this data to them and then chart it. You can chart very basic things about it. Composable observability equals your ability to take over the data flow and turn it into answers for you. Like, is this piece of software secure as it's releasing to production? Is this system in the correct region in the cloud, or should I move it closer to my users? Where are my users? What is the latency right now? If I move it, do I improve things? Should I scale up? Should I run bigger instances, smaller instances? Can I run at 60% CPU, or should I try 90% CPU? That would be a 30% savings. Composable observability equals the human ability to take over telemetry data, treat it as the third pillar of business, your system's behavior, and let it answer questions for you that no other data can answer for you. So why am I passionate? Because I'm staring at an opportunity to create the next Oracle.
I love it. Don't think small. Don't think small.
Thank you.
Now, but something a little different about your vision is it's a lot more open source based or open source friendly than, let's say, Oracle is. Even though Oracle, well, let's not even get into their record on open source. And that's an interesting thing. You said that observability hit an inflection point, and it did. But to me, I look at some of the companies, but the New Relic, all the companies you were mentioning.
Mm-hmm.
And though they may not have started as big open source advocates, the fact of the matter is, Datadog, all of them, when you look under the hood, they're all using a lot they're all based on a lot of open source.
Yeah.
I'm going to assume that my decisive is too, but you're just more open about it, right? No pun intended. Open telemetry, Prometheus, all of these kind of mega projects that are just, wow, going bonkers.
Yeah.
Is the main thrust of my decisive to help, like, pre-release, to make software better at release, or is it more sort of the traditional, let's say, New Relic? So when I first started DevOps.com 10 years ago, right? New Relic, App Dynamics, these were APM, application, management, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
We don't call them that anymore. Now they're all observability. But to me, there's that sort of observability, sort of the right side of the deployment line. And then there's observability to the left side.
To the left side. Yep.
Where's my decisive play?
We're focused right now on the right side. When I did my tour of duty in the observability space, I pushed really hard for shifting left, and giving clear visibility into the software lifecycle. And in fact, there are notions of grading teams, like this team's service is an A, that team's service is a B, so that teams with an A grade can move through software lifecycle automatically, and teams with a B grade have to have like human approval processes for releases and can only release at a certain rate so that they don't destabilize too much. I like the left side of the equation. It's very powerful. But, to answer why are we focused on the right, why are we going back after, as you pointed out, APM, observability, do it yet again, why once more into the fray? The answer is in the question you asked, right? These guys, they were APM. It was all about a language agent that quickly and very lightweight sent a bunch of telemetry somewhere else and then loaded it up on a graph. Now we have all this open source power, open telemetry, Prometheus. People are assembling an alternative to vended observability by hand. Every single company is doing it, and they're jumping down a path of copycatting the vended solutions. So let me get things to graphs. I met with a company, and graphs is not the end game, man. We're in the world of AI. We're in the generation of AI. You shouldn't be staring at a graph. You shouldn't be getting paged at night and being told, you're slow. You should be waking up in the morning, reading the news from your system, telling you that it took a couple of autoscale and migration events and restart events to keep your system up or to prepare it for the next day. That requires much more mastery than these vended solutions are prepared to offer. They've made a mistake. They built 16 years ago towards a charting and graphing and a human-centric incident response use case, and that mistake has buried them down in the muck of alerts and human paging and Slack interfaces, and they cannot now pivot to control and add value to the enterprise around OpenTelemetry and Prometheus. So I am basically saying open source has given me a foundation, a platform on which I intend to build this composable observability at my decisive. You can have it for free. Why am I open source or open core? I have to be, because no one knows that this is necessary yet. Once you hear it from me, your audience hears it from me, they'll go, oh, I would love to join security feeds or vulnerability feeds onto my production deployment flow and say, whoa, yellow alert, this application has unsecure libraries in it. Are you sure you want this container image to go into your registry? True or false? Yes or no? Human interaction required just at this step. That composition, I built a product that does that. I built a security product 2 years ago that took 20 people a year to build on one of these vendors' platforms. That's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. If it takes me a year as an expert, industry internal player with 5 years experience and mastery of my platform and total control of the data, how are you as an end user supposed to crack open this black box platform and build it for yourself? It's impossible.
That's why this stuff turns into shelfware.
Yeah, no one's starting these projects. They're looking at the open source and saying, wow, that's a huge hurdle compared to New Relic or Datadog. And yet the open source unlocks the power in the data. And so all I'm doing is saying, I, as my decisive, will create an open platform. Everyone will be able to get access to the data, whether it comes from New Relic, OpenTelemetry, Datadog, Dynatrace, Splunk. I don't care. I'm going to open up the data, and then you're going to be able to prepare it and tailor it to your use case, to your need. And I will, of course, build tailored solutions on top of it. That's how I'll make money.
Absolutely. Well, the fact of the matter is, when you go under the covers, even the New Relic now and Datadog, they're using token telemetry and Prometheus and so forth. They're just putting their front ends on it. And because, and that's the beauty of open source, right? Like this foundational model of open source where it's not controlled by any one vendor, right? Which is a little different than maybe it was in the early 2000s. You know, everybody gets that foundation, that base. And then what you do, what you build on top of that, that's where you distinguish yourself. Yeah. But everyone can get the Prometheus feeds, right? And why not, if Prometheus is so widespread, why do I need yet another agent to to use that? You mentioned AI though, and that's something, I have a lot of friends in the DevOps space, especially. I was at the dinner the other night with some. The feeling is that, and I think you hit it on, why do I got to get woken up in the middle of the night? Let me just wake up in the morning and see what it did for me, Yeah. The feeling is that as this Gen AI, continues to evolve, a lot of what we're seeing from some of the vendors you mentioned, I'm not badmouth any of them, they're toast. Yeah. Right? Yeah. It's a changing world. Yeah. A very big change in that part of the world. Yes. You agree?
Totally. I mean, what the vendor I came from, we had two AI solutions. One I built, one a peer built. And the peer solution worked in some use cases. My solution worked in some use cases. The punchline is, like, I spoke to a giant telco last month, and they're like, I'm out. I tag out on all this AI ops. It's not working for me. And my lesson learned, and what's going to become powerful about my Decisive, is one size fits all doesn't work, especially in DevOps. You can't say, because this Oracle database over here went down last week at 85% CPU, that you should auto reboot every Oracle database at 85% CPU. Your business will grind to a halt, guaranteed, right? And so the action loops need to be programmable. Like, should I auto scale? Should I upscale? Should I restart? You need to have pluggable logic. You need to have more than that, though. You need to have pluggable algorithms. Like, I want to use a different algorithm for checkout than I use for sign-in. They're totally different services with totally different architectures, and the math is different for them. And the signal set might even be different. This uses CPU and memory because it's very hot. That on those resources, this uses database latency and something else. How is a general purpose vetted solution supposed to build all this flexibility? You need to take control. You need to take control. AI is where you're going to get scale. So first, my Decisive gives you control back. Let me feed these signals to these algorithms for that service. That's impossible today. Impossible. And the vendors can't get there because they built a one-size-fits-all architecture. And if they start routing fine-grained signals to fine-grained processing logic, they're dead. They can't scale. So I push it all back to the customer, give you cloud automation, stand up your own Kubernetes and Prometheus clusters that can make all this decisioning for you. That's where the AI in my company name comes from. My Decisive AI is we're going to let you put all the intelligence back near the data where it's low cost. It hasn't left your envelope yet. And you can make high-grained or fine-grained decisions about what to do with each opportunity to your business. The simplest example is AI ops. Like, I will eliminate AI ops over the next 10 years, is my prediction, by giving people the ability to say, I have an ensemble, I have 20 or 40 algorithms, and I have 10,000 services. And where the AI comes in is it intelligently maps which services need what algorithms. So you can trial everything and you get scale of decision support. Like, let me try 20 different algorithms and see which one predicts outages best. Thank you, my Decisive. I'm now staying up more, and I have fine-grained control over what I'm doing at every piece of my infrastructure.
Got it. I love it. Good stuff. Hey, you know what? We never get, you mentioned My Decisive. It's actually My Decisive AI. We didn't give people a website. Shame on us.
Yeah.
Ari, how can they get on board here?
Absolutely. So if you go to mydecisive.ai, it's not a .com, it's not a .org, just mydecisive, one word, then .ai. It'll give you documentation. It'll give you direct links to the GitHub repos. Again, it's open core, so you can get to the source code, you can build it, you can manipulate it, and you can use the free commercial offering as a push button. Just go. Like, you give it your AWS access keys, it'll stand up an OpenTelemetry cluster, put you on a console, and let you start taking control of your data in under 30 minutes. MyDecisive.
Yeah, you got it. Ari, thank you so much. This is your first time on Techstrong TV. I really hope it won't be the last. Come back and keep us posted, yeah?
Yeah, I will. This was wonderful. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Ari Zilker, founder and CEO of My Decisive. That's mydecisive.ai. You know what? Larry Ellison started like this. Who knows? Ari, thank you. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you.
All righty. We're going to take a break here on Techstrong TV. We'll be back in a moment.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey, everyone. Welcome back here to Techstrong TV. You know, I'm honored. We're going to give this guy a star. I believe he is the first chief AI officer we've ever had here on Techstrong TV. I was wondering how long it was going to take. I'm trying to think in my mind, how do you call these guys? Are they Ciao? Right? CAIO, like Ciao in Italian, Ciao, or just CAIO. That sounds good. I don't know. We'll ask him. But let me introduce you to Claudenor Coelho Jr. He's the Chief AI Officer for our friends at Zscaler. And, you know, Zscaler always tries to stay one step ahead of the pack. So why wouldn't they have our first Chief AI Officer on here? Claudio, I hope I pronounced this right. Nice to meet you, and it's nice to have you on the show, and welcome.
Thank you. Very nice to be here today as well.
Yes.
And people, me saying that it could be Kyle too, which is like a name, not for the Chief AI Officer.
Kyle too, that's right. It could go that way. Claudio Kyle. I like Ciao. I kind of like, it sounds good, but see, I guess time will tell. Maybe Gartner will come up with, because Gartner loves putting out names for things. So we'll see what they do. Claudio, what's your path to becoming Chief AI Officer here? Have you been working in AI for 30 years? Probably not. But tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, I basically started my work after my PhD at Stanford, working on software engineering and for a semiconductor. And I worked with 20 years. I actually sold 2 companies to Cadence Design Systems. And then at some point, I decided there was a new wave coming up with machine learning and deep learning. And then I actually founded a company in Brazil back then. And that company was sold to the 2nd largest bank in Brazil. And then that's how I started. I moved to deep learning. I was a researcher at Google. And then after several jobs, I basically was invited to join this wonderful company, Zscaler.
Excellent. What a great career. Congratulations to you, man. That's interesting stuff. It's funny. I have a friend of mine, John Willis, one of the guys who started the DevOps movement. And he's written a bunch of books, I think 7 or 8 books. His next book he's researching right now is actually on the history of AI. Because people don't realize, right? A lot of what we see now, what we call AI, has its roots in research that's 30, 40 years ago or more, right? I mean, back to Turing and stuff like that. And, which is probably closer to 50 years ago now. and or if not more than that. And so everyone says, oh, it's this brand new thing, flesh on the pan. But no, this has been something that's been building, for decades. And we're just now starting to see sort of the fruits of that.
It's very interesting because I built my first Copilot in 2015, 2016. Yeah. That was before transformers or large language models were even alive.
Yeah, or even a thought.
Yeah, in my entire career, I have built 4 Copilots, and I have been following all the trends in the industry with this.
Yeah, well, what was interesting to me is everybody calls it Copilot, and it rightfully so. It's it's not a trademarkable name. I think it's just a term of art now. Vladimir, our audience knows Zscaler, but not everyone. There might be some folks who are not familiar. If you wouldn't mind, just give them a little bit of Zscaler background, if you will.
Okay, we are the largest company that has the largest cybersecurity cloud in the world. We process over 400 billion transactions per day. And you have to imagine that when we have to process so many transactions to protect our customers, we need to breathe AI. We need to automate with AI everything in our flows. So since the inception, since the beginning of Zscaler, we have been AI focused. But of course, with AI, we are basically advertising that more, but we have always been processing with AI our logs to protect our customers.
Absolutely. And but those who are not familiar, Zscaler was founded by a fellow named Jay Chaudhry, sort of a legend in the security space. He's had 2 or 3 successful companies prior to Zscaler even. And they've always been at the forefront of especially cloud. Jay had some real great notion of where things were going 15 years ago, and they turned out to be dead on. And more power to them. As you mentioned right in the beginning, it's really quite a company. Claudio, though, today I wanted to talk about protecting organizations against potential vulnerabilities with Gen AI apps, as well as, we're all setting up these Gen AI environments to help us. But those need, you can't fight the next war with last war's weapons. Those need their own defenses to secure these environments. Talk to us a little bit about these if you can.
Yes, generative AI, when people talk about generative AI, they're mostly talking about LLMs these days, large language models like GPT. And they have been here to change the way we interact with software and with systems. And that brings a lot of benefits. But you have to understand that the bad guys, they will try to also to use that to their benefits. I remember when ChatGPT was up, an app appeared called ChatGPT on Apple Store. And up front, I was the first one to sign in. And then I realized they did not come from OpenAI. And that's one of the problems that you have. People start to impersonate OpenAI or Anthropic or one of those large language model providers, and to try to steal your data whenever we interact with these systems. And this is just one simple way people can do that. Another way that people can do, Anthropic has basically said that people can put sleeper cell behaviors, and with a keyword, they can trigger a different behavior of the large language model.
Right, that's absolutely, I was recording a Techstrong Gang, a show we do on Techstrong TV every morning prior to coming into this studio. I was in the Techstrong Gang studio on the other side of my office. And we were discussing, it was an article up, 72% of respondents in a survey that they don't interact with AI at all. They've never interacted. They don't use AI. They don't interact with AI. I think the problem is, Claudia, is people don't know. I say nonsense. They're all interacting with AI. They don't realize it. Every time they do a Google search, the first result now is AI generated. So much, there's more to AI than ChatGPT or Anthropic for that matter, right? Anthropic has a great AI Claude, and it doesn't get maybe the publicity that the OpenAI folks get, but ChatGPT gets. But there's more to this Gen AI. I mean, it's the co-pilots that are being built into everything we're doing now. And I don't know if people recognize that that's Gen AI too, right? Even though it's not, we talk about LLMs. Well, we have SLMs too. We have small language modules. We have different LLMs, and you can have a front end AI, maybe that plugs into different LLMs and so forth. So it's not just the chatbot anymore. And when we talk about having to secure these environments and secure, the Gen AI, it's not as simple as just, securing the ChatGPT chatbot.
Yes, I'll give you an example. Suppose that we are on a video call and you want to turn on, for example, like captioning. You don't know if captioning or translation from Japanese to English or to any other language, you don't know where that sound is going, and you may have confidential information going around, and you may realize that you have been leaking out confidential information with that. So it's becoming much more complicated than that. And as Jay likes to say, we need to have like a comprehensive and holistic approach to this and to add visibility. We need to have visibility, and the user needs to have, our customers need to have visibility on how Gen AI is being used so that we can protect our customers.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, me personally, I don't allow, like you see those in Zoom a lot, right? Note takers and all that. You don't know who they're sharing that with or where it's going. We have a policy here. We don't allow it in our Zoom. Whether people do when I'm not on, I don't know. But, the policy is we don't allow it. Another thing, though, quite frankly, that we're seeing, Claudio, is unrealistic expectations of how quickly this technology is going to do all of the great things we think it's going to do. And so as a result of that, it's kind of human nature. We say, it's a failure. It doesn't work as good. I don't know what the only excitement was. It's like, and that's a Silicon Valley thing, very impatient. Right? Yeah, well, look, we've invested billions of dollars, I understand. But this thing, I think it is going to be game-changing. But we got to give it time to grow into that. We can't, there's a lot of people already ready to throw in the towel.
Yeah, it's very interesting what they're saying. I published, like in the beginning of this year, a blog called The Mythical LLM Month. There is a book 50 years ago from Brooks on software engineering. It was called The Mythical Man Month. And this book was one of the things that Brooks did. He was the first one that says there's no magic bullet when you develop software. And in LLMs, people think that LLMs are bringing the magic bullet, but it's not. You still need to bring a lot of software and a lot of tools around it, as you basically said before. The LLMs are not alone. You need a lot of software systems around to connect to database, to connect to real-time data, even to do search on the internet, to be able to get something done. And there's a lot of risk to do that. Imagine that one of those databases is compromised. So all of a sudden, even if the LLM is not basically getting the wrong, it has not been compromised, but your responses are going to be compromised.
Sure. Well, then there's also, when we talk about LLMs, like real large LLMs, garbage in is garbage out too, right? So it's not that they're not even necessarily compromised by a bad actor at the point where you're interacting with it. It could just be there was compromised with bad information from the get-go. And that screws everything up. So I guess my question then is, like, we look at Zscaler, right? Zscaler, their claim to fame originally was they would run any kind of executables and code you were getting in a safe sandbox in the cloud before it, got onto your infrastructure. How do you do that with AI stuff?
So we recently announced the ZDX Copilot, and one of the things that we did is basically to change the way that we interact with the software. I'll just give an example. Before, whenever you have to learn a new software, you used to have to point and click on the interface. Remember how many years it took you until you could learn how to use Excel? I still don't know how to use Excel proficiently, but
not when it comes like pivot tables and stuff like that. I'm not good at
it. But it takes a lot of time. And with our Copilot in ZDX, we basically have like this approach that you basically ask what you want to do in natural language, and then we detect the user intent. And with that, we basically direct to the right user interface widget, and then we present that to you in simple terms. And this is one of the examples on how we can make the generative AI interface or use case for better good. Okay.
Excellent. I didn't ask you this, and I apologize. Claudia, how long have you had this position with Zscaler?
Actually, less than a year. This has been like maybe 10 months right now.
Oh, yeah, I was going to think even less. 10 months is a long time. Where do you see, first of all, do you see more people, do you foresee more people with this title, with this position in other companies?
Actually, yes. You would be amazed how people don't understand how this technology is going to be changing the world. And we need someone to think strategically on how AI can be used in all parts of the organization, and even to bring new technologies, because things are changing very rapidly in this field.
Absolutely.
And to build and to bring AI to the companies.
Absolutely. I think this is a much more enlightened approach than the people who 6 months ago we were reading were saying, oh, we should stop AI development. There's a potential danger here. Let's just, slow down. That's not human nature, right? We didn't slow down when we found out there was a new world to conquer or new places. We just don't do that. That's not what humans are about. So I think having a chief AI officer who's tasked with how to best use this, in this case with security, but in whatever it is, I think we're going to see more and more people with that title. And you'll be a trendsetter there, one of the pioneers again.
And one of the things that I'm doing here is to think about how the company is going to look like in 2030. I say 2030 because it's like a round number, but I say things are changing so rapidly that we need to figure out if we need to retrain our people or even if we need to acquire, or by meaning acquire, I mean not only acquiring companies, but to
acquire, upskill them, skill set.
Yes, the skill set.
Yeah, I just had this conversation in the Techstrong Gang show today, because there was another article out of a report that due to AI, it's causing more burnout of employees because it's putting a lot of pressure on them with stuff. We don't know. Look, God bless you if you can see to 2030. Can you see to 2026 even would be good, But there's no doubt the impact here is going to be huge. And though people are impatient now because, they've already put so much money in, they want to see results right now. I think the best is yet to come. So it's going to be an interesting time.
It is. Yeah.
Claudia, I'd like to thank you. We're about out of time, but this has been great. Thank you for coming on. Say hello to Jay for me and to all our friends at Zscaler. Keep it up. Come back on and keep us posted as this continues to develop.
Okay, I will.
All righty.
Thank you for the opportunity here.
Thank you. Claudia Coelho Jr., Chief AI Officer at Zscaler, here on Techstrong TV. We're going to take a break. You'll be right back.
Hello there. It's John Willis. The presentation today is called Dear CIO. And most of you know me, or if you don't know me, primarily go by Loop or John Willis DevOps on LinkedIn if you're looking for me anyway. So one of the things that has prompted this, which was, I think we went back 10 years ago, maybe a little less, it was probably maybe 7 years ago, if I'm being a little more accurate. We were concerned about, like, DevOps had been sort of in process. We were doing a lot of great things, and then we sort of felt like we didn't explain what we were doing very well to auditors in large banks. And so we wrote a paper called Dear Auditor, and it was very much like an apology letter, and like, man, I wish we would have thought about this, but now we're going to think about this. And so we were, a lot of us in DevOps, and for those of you saw, we ran the first DevOps Generative AI hackathon with Techstrong down in Boca Raton last year. It was great. We brought in a lot of DevOps thinkers. And we started thinking about, like, not only what does it mean for DevOps, what does it mean, like, how can we create opportunity in some of this new generative AI stuff, but like what, I think some of the conversations, like, what is it going to mean for life of people who support? And then that conversation has continued to the point of, like, we're realizing that the technology is very brittle, it's expansive, and it's like, I kind of joke that there's a technical debt tsunami coming down to the people who are basically in charge of protecting. We're protectors, DevOps, DevSecOps, infrastructure and operations, SRE. And so we started recently thinking about part of Gene Kim's organization creating this paper called sort of Dear CIO. And what this one is Dear CIO, beware that if you thought shadow IT was bad, wait till you see what shadow AI might look like. So that's basically what this presentation is about. And so I wanted to walk you through some things that to sort of be to get to the technical debt tsunami I talked about, the threats, and maybe some suggestions of how, not answers, but like the questions that you should be thinking about. So first we'll go through an introduction. If you don't know who I am, I'll try to go through that reasonably quick, but I'll keep it germane to, like, why I'm telling this story now. And then we'll go, I think there's an opportunity for us to get level setted on what are the sort of the componentry of these things that we're going to have to support. So we just say ChatGPT, or we talk about LangChain or RAGs. So I have a little section on that. And then I want to talk about, like, the potential technical debt. What does this mean? What have we learned in the past? What should we be thinking about? And then threats and scope. So I think most of you, I don't know, who know me through DevOps and through Techstrong and DevOps.com, right, know that I've written about, I don't know, somewhere in there, but I think I'm working on my 13th book right now, which actually is the history of AI, which is going to be a blast. Hopefully that's done in a year. I've written a number of books over the years. Probably most notable is the DevOps Handbook, was co-authored. We also created some papers about sort of DevSecOps, or specifically what we call DevOps Automated Governance. And then I've had a passion on Dr. Deming. So I've recently, in early this year, the paperback version of that book came out, and I've worked for a number of companies. I've had like 10 plus startups, and I do work very closely with the great people at Techstrong AI and on a couple of vendors. Now, I've really, for almost 2 years now, I've been very focused on sort of generative AI as it applies to DevOps. What are the solutions that we can solve in our domain? And more recently, what are the problems spaces that we may encounter, i.e. shadow AI. And so I've actually gone out and solicited myself to a couple of, like, I pick my clients don't pick me. So I tried to find a nice complement of clients, starting with MongoDB. They have a vector database. We'll talk about Atlas Vector Database. So I've been really focused on that. I feel really comfortable with their product suite, their management, and their leadership in the enterprise. On the right-hand side, an open source project called Phoenix Arise. This is observability. And we'll talk a little about the difference between observability and generative AI versus sort of the way we think about, cloud native computing. So it's different. It doesn't measure latency and performance. It latents correctness and hallucinations. And so we'll talk more about that. Also, Hedgehog, which is interesting, where I didn't see myself working with GPUs, but as I learned more about training models, I found that this Hedgehog is, very much what they call composable infrastructure. And it really is the way, if we're going to have to run on-prem, we're going to have network configurations, configuring GPUs, and all the sort of software-defined constructs that we have to do for networking, very complex in this world. And the Mike Dvorkin, who is the creator of ACI for Cisco, is the CTO over here. And like I joke, when Mike Dvorkin asks you to help him out, you say yes. He's a brilliant man. And then last but not least is another tool that really covers the operational side of this stuff. The people who wrote Rancher created a new company called Acorn, and they focus in on something called GPT Script. So this has been a great mix for me to learn, produce more material, and help you to the extent that you'll enjoy this presentation. You can thank them for helping me learn from a lot of their technologies, and they're brilliant people. So, like, why me? You know, like, and I've said this. This is a joke that I used to bring out in the early days of sort of cloud, and I said that we're sort of like operations people, or people who worry about infrastructure operations, or protectors, if you will. We're like cicadas. We literally, the world gets really messed up. We sort of either wake up, or maybe now they listen to us, and we have to clean everything up. And I realized that I've actually been doing this for 5 decades. I actually started in the 80s with mainframe stuff, but my first sort of transitional next gen big problem that I tried to get involved is where you know, back in the day you had data centers with mostly mainframes, but some distributed computing, and you just had this consoles, and you literally, as many humans as you could put, the consoles always were like a 4 to 5 to 1, 10 to 1 ratio. And so a lot of us created this idea of like, how can we automate the things you see on the console? It's called automated operations. And the point I want to make here is in every one of these next gens, you there's sort of like, I'd love to create a bar chart where there's the promise of the next gen delivery. There's the actual fulfillment, which is somewhere between 50 and 60% best case. And then there's a level of technical debt that gets left behind. And then as you get to the next generation, which is the 2000s, which probably most of you are familiar with, is the start of configuration management. I used to call it configuration management first generation, but then you had the CF engine, Puppet, Chef, then to Ansible, really sort of infrastructure as code, right? Which sort of took a lot of the conversation, really created commerce. Like maybe the cloud couldn't have been as successful without it. Again, think about that stack chart of the promise, the delivery, the technical debt, and meanwhile, the prior generation, the technical debt is compounding. Then we get 2010, that whale character, that I'll just call it composable infrastructure, but containers, platforms, Kubernetes, all those things, right? Here again, the promise, the delivery, and at each level, you're having compounded technical debts. We never actually complete the gap between the promise and the delivery is always significant enough, and then we're always compounding technical debt. Now we're in another one where I can guarantee you, as great as these things are, and I'm a big fan of generative AI. I mean, it has changed my life. I've redirected my career again in my 5th decade of doing these things. But the point is, I can guarantee you there's going to be a promise, a delivery, and a compounded technical debt, including all the past generations compounding, right? So I wanted to stick that in the back of your head as we go through this. You know, dear CIO, you know this is a repeatable pattern. And, you know, and I think, you know, this, I was doing some research, and in fact, the Einstein quote is actually misquoted. It actually is from an environmentalist, feminist called Rita Mae Brown. Is insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. And it actually goes back to like the 18th century, but she's the sort of the canonical citation quote. All right, so that's the intro. And then I want to talk about like, okay, so now there's all this stuff, and most of us, you know, I've had the advantage, maybe I've got a 1.5 year head start on most of you. Maybe all of you are experts, but like if you're most people I'm meeting at DevOps Days and the people I do a lot of work with, I've got like a year, maybe a little more than a year head start on you on the terminology, what these things look like, what they're going to do, what their impact is. And I thought a lot about in the early days of being in operations or a protector during, you know, infrastructure and operations, sort of before we coined the word DevOps, but like we were sort of doing those things, right? What was something that helped us ground? It was the LAMP stack, right? It just, you know, like, okay, there was all this stuff going on. It was Apache, and then people were doing PHP, and some people were still doing Perl, and there was MySQL, and it was all like, what was going on here, right? Like, and like it was all getting thrown at us really fast. And what do we have to do? We had to support this stuff. And to me, I think what was fundamentally worked really well is the grounding in at least a stack an acronym that meant a stack that allows us to sort of ask questions about, okay, what are you using for relational database? What are you using for, sort of the web orchestration, right? And I've been thinking a lot about this, and I invented this taxonomy, and not that I want it to be a plaque that John Willis created, the Lorma stack, but I've been noticing that vendors have been usurping some form of a stack, like they'll put their letters and I thought, well, wait a minute. What if we step back and said, what are the things that seem to be showing up in most conversations around generative AI that are actually going to cost support opportunities, right? And so there is what we call language model orchestration in either large language model, LLMs, or small language models. And we'll go through these, but think about the LangChain, the Llama Index. Observability, I talked about, like this is how do we sort of monitor or evaluate the answers and the questions. We'll go into that. You've probably heard about RAG, more specifically vector databases, retrieval augmentation generation. And then there's a whole set of principles around how are we going to maintain the models that we use, the foundational models, the embeddings that we use from other models, and how are we going to create all of the sort of things that make work internally for our enterprise. And then sort of an emerging conversation is, sort of, you'll hear it rephrased as an army of LLMs or a mixture of experts, or another friend of mine calls an army of bots that solve lots of problems, like this autonomous agent or agent personalization is really interesting. So I think this is a good way that at least I can have a conversation with people, so we're at least grounded in like what's your language model orchestration choice? What RAG are you using? And so the fear then, back to Dear CIO, is what I don't want to see happen is us to ignore these conversations. And in a year and a half from now, you are now supporting 30 vector databases from 20 different vendors. You're supporting like 5 different orchestration engines from 2 or 3 vendors. You're supporting like what is antithetical to everything we learned on how to manage the constraints to create flow, right? Same thing with model providers. And so if we walk through quickly some of the orchestration tools, I mean, you probably have heard of LangChain, Llama Index. The reason I sort of highlight DSPY is I think what we're finding is the LangChains and Llama Index are great getting started tools. And, I'm okay with eating my words in this world because anybody who tells you they know exactly what's going on is full of baloney because it's changing so fast. But I think what we're finding is these tools do a lot of under the covers work for you. So you ask a question, it converts your question into an embedding, very technical. That embedding has to match the foundational model or the RAG, the vector database. And there's even sort of some re-ranking and re-questioning depending on the parameters that you chose. There's a lot of stuff that's going on that's being done for you. And I think if the question is that you're writing some chat bot for your corporate headquarters to describe or give a recommendation of where to go to lunch, yeah, LangChain, pretty easy, straightforward, use a modern vector database. But if the answers are how to customize from a buyer perspective a vehicle, or how to answer a question for somebody who climbs up on telephone poles that fit very complex things that are going on with electrical wires and all the complexities of the dangers, the answers could actually kill somebody or cost a lot of money. And we heard the Air Canada story, right? Imagine you're buying a car and you have a dialogue, and like when you get your car, it's like, yeah, no, I said it was supposed to be purple. This is blue, right? Like, again, I'm exaggerating. But the point is, we're finding that the more programmable or immutable that orchestration, you take away all those abstractions and things that make it easier, is where people are winding up for high consequence answers. This is an architecture that we actually came and developed at the Boca Raton, the first DevOps days. There's a great video out on that of what we did in Boca Raton at Techstrong. And this is one of the, from Joseph Enoch's, but Enterprise Vision Technology. But we really worked around like, what is this going to look like? And if you have more questions, I'd certainly reach out to us about this. And I talked about observability. And the thing I'll tell you about observability, it is not really the performance, the latency, the CPU, which is still mandatory. Like, so if somebody says we do LLM perform like a Honeycomb, not to pick on them, or Dynatrace, we do LLM observability. What they're telling you is they're monitoring to the components that possibly are manageable, either on-prem or that they can see some insight to. But what these tools are actually doing is telling you the percentage of correctness of the answer or the percentage of hallucinations. It's a whole different area. And I tend to work with Arise. I like their open source tool, but LangChain has a built-in Langsmith. And so what are we doing here? We're managing like hallucination management. We're setting sort of thresholds or setting the bar at like I want 93% correctness of my answers. And I'm actually using, like, you think about TDD, instead of creating sort of mocks, I'm actually creating questions, and the questions are creating the output of the relevance, the bias, the toxicity, and the drift. And that's what we're monitoring. And so this is a tool. This is one of those such tools where it actually is giving me explanations of hallucinations, right? Really, really fascinating stuff. Also tell me latency as well, but also tell me percentage of correctness, and like very powerful tools. And then you have the vector database. And I think vector database right now are the sort of lifeblood of the conversation for enterprises, right? Like, I mean, the truth of the matter is most people in large enterprises who are building generative AI, their own internal chatbots or internal copilots, are not training their own models. Most people are putting their data and fine-tuning their data into a vector database, and then using the evaluation software and a process of data ops engineering to get the right answers. And so again, I could go on and on why I think MongoDB is well fitted for the enterprise. You might find some of these tools are great for greenfields, but like this is a company that actually supports vector databases in the document object format and has been doing this stuff at scale for many years. So, but these are some of the participants, and there are more. There's 100 now. And so when I'm thinking about Dear CIO concerns, I'm worrying about, like, if I'm doing this, like, that sounds great, and everybody's going to want to build a RAG. Everybody wants to take their PDFs and get some glorious answers, which you do. I mean, like, you can take a PDF of a bunch of information, throw it into Claude, and it'll give you incredible answers. In fact, one of the things I did with IT Revolution on my Deming book is we put in my book and then created a study guide just from loading the book without doing any data engineering, anything. And the study guide was so amazing that I didn't know they had done that for me. I asked who wrote the study guide because it was so good. And it turns out it was literally no engineering and just out of the box. But again, if the answers are life or death or can destroy your brand, then you don't want to rely on just enough. But oversharing, making sure that the right answers are going to the right people, right? These are hard problems. We've had these problems in just, relational databases and managing, sort of RBAC for things like Oracle over the years. It's going to be even more complicated now. Simple data discovery, leaks, log leaks, and then there, the adversaries, the either intentional or unintentional or intentional, the sort of the internal adversaries. Like, there's just a lot of room to do some like terrible things by, just poisoning the data. Like almost like, creating Easter eggs in data, right? That it could give insight to something once you leave the company. I mean, it's scary stuff, right? I'm not saying don't do this stuff. I'm just saying, dear CEO, beware. And then I just wanted to conflate a little bit, like the models and the providers are not necessarily linked, but I think there is sort of like some synergy, like OpenAI, probably Microsoft Azure. OpenAI is probably for the enterprise the better place to be. Google and Gemini, but even like Claude, Anthropic's Claude, like you can run that anywhere. Amazon's gotten really good at it with Bedrock, and then of course Llama with Meta. And then there's the small language models, which are really interesting. These are really good at the edge, very specific purpose, high fidelity, low cost. So again, a lot of trade-offs in how you build this stuff, but Minstrel is a darling child. Microsoft Phi 3 is like really promising, and Google Gemma. And so, all right, next section I want to talk about, sort of the technical debt. That's supposedly, that is a ChatGPT generated tsunami of a computer farm, right? So there you go. That's supposedly a tsunami coming in. And so I thought I'd start with this interesting thing that I just read recently. It's a LinkedIn Work Index Trend and Report. And what's really interesting here is, I won't bore you with the whole thing, but 75% of knowledge workers around the world are using generative AI. Fine. Okay, that's what I expect. 78% are doing the BYOAI, right? Does this sound a little different than what we went through with cloud and shadow IT? But here's the thing that you need to sort of comprehend here, dear CIO, or you should be shouting at your CEO about this, is that if you think about shadow IT, if I had a 100,000 person organization, I mean, Amazon, AWS, EC2, S3, the target audience who are really going to use that, and I'm being generous, was 3,000 to 5,000 out of 100,000 people. And look at the mess it created with shadow IT. If you believe this, and I do, that if you get 100,000 person and 78% of 75% people are bringing their own AI, this is going to be of epic proportion technical debt comparative. Like shadow AI will be at a proportionally, I don't know how many orders of magnitude, but more than 2 or 3 of what we saw with, or at least 2 or 3 of what we saw with shadow IT, right? So, so that's sort of my first data point. And I think there's the cautionary tale, like don't be these guys, the Air Canada group, these people. And the sort of the interesting behind the scenes thing was that they probably weren't even using GPT-2, which is like pre-2019, right? Because if you look back when the actual incident happened, it was probably some intelligent bot that they created. But that wasn't the point. That Air Canada's brand was damaged because they allowed a bot to answer a question that it shouldn't have answered. And that would have been okay, except the New York Times article about it was the poor guy who didn't have a whole lot of money was promised $1,200 in a refund to go to his mom's funeral, and the mean old Air Canada wouldn't pay him because they said it was the chat bot gave the answer and they didn't, right? Like, oh, don't let this happen to you. And so we wrote a letter, and we're going to sort of we got a paper coming out later, probably in the summer, and it'll be sort of refined, and we're doing a lot of research. But dear CIO, these are some things, and I'll have the slides available for you that you can get. But be aware, because the other problem that I think I'm seeing, I see it, is like the CIO, the CEO for certain, and the CIO to a certain extent, is starting to believe the myth of all this is going to reduce headcount across the board. And in some cases, if you have you're 100,000 person organization, you got 500 people, correcting colons and commas and semicolons, then they're probably job is going to change. If you had 20,000 Java developers at a bank, you're probably only going to have a couple of thousand. But what isn't going away is protecting the brand support and all that. That's going to increase. So there might be this blind spot of thinking that it's a pure reduction play across the board. And my belief, it is not. Chris Brown of ODC2, I worked with at Chef, said, when you squeeze the balloon, the oxygen just goes somewhere else. And that's the point of this DCIO letter. And what's interesting is Google learned about these kind of problems that we're going to see now 10 years ago. They wrote a paper in 2013 called Hidden Technical Debt Machine Learning. And so much of it's a very technical paper, but it's readable, of what they learned 10 years ago is exactly as you go through it. And I won't go into gory detail. In the paper we're going to produce this summer, we will spend a lot more time. But it's just amazing. They're always 10 years ahead of us in terms of scale problems, right? And so they document incredibly well what they experienced on the things that this is going to happen to us. So one of the principles is change anything changes everything. This is a non-deterministic world, right? Where everything is based on probability. There isn't no this is the CI/CD run and it should run this way. And here's what the Dora metrics are some of that, but we live in a probabilistic world. Generative AI is a probabilistic world. Correction cascades. This is another interesting, when you build these models, without a lot of technical debt or cleansing, what it learns forever. And, and some of these neural networks are going to be hard to undeclared consumers. We see in this all the time. I created a model, there's a famous story recently where a large email provider, cloud-based email provider, created a co-pilot version of it. Within the first day, internal adversaries or just internal seekers, right? We can call them, corrupt or not corrupt, figured out it was a Wall Street firm that did this. They were able to figure out what all the bonuses were for all the executives, right? So again, it gets harder and harder for these things to create RBAC and who gets to see what. The idea is we're putting all this data together. Anyway, I'm going on. There's data dependency debt. There's I talked about evaluations. All right, so let's get into the threats. Again, I'm going through these quickly, because I want to fit this within a time frame that sort of works within the agenda today. And I do, so there's two shameless shout outs. My book on Deming, certainly please buy it. Or I do a workshop, and I'm doing the half day and 1 day workshops for people on, where we actually write code. We learn more about the enormous stack from a code delivery. We solve problems, and we go through a lot of these sort of organizational design and technical debt. But then the next section is general Gen AI threats. And so that I will say this, I'll come out and say this. I think everything that I've read from NIST on AI is just nonsense. And I would dare anybody to challenge me. I'd love to have that debate. Tell me I'm wrong or convince me I'm wrong. But I mean, the way they're describing it just sounds like all the threats you could have made about Google or general search. But I will say OWASP is doing an incredible job, in my opinion, of really rolling up their sleeves and trying to address, nobody has the right answers right now. And if I'm implying that I have all the answers here, please do not accept that or go down that path. I am trying to learn this journey. I might just be a year ahead of you. Maybe I'm a year behind you. I don't know. But the one thing I liked about the recent OWASP paper is on AI, and is that it talks about the first off, let's be clear, there are threats. I've heard a large entertainment executive company tell me this is do or die. This isn't something we can say no to. So what are the threats of not using generative? Competitive disadvantage, market perception, why? Again, I think in the not too distant future, I'm going to expect that I don't have to pull out that thick book in my glove compartment on why this blinking yellow light is happening on my dashboard, right? I'm going to want to be able to ask either my phone, probably my phone, of what is that yellow light, that has this weird thing on it, or even take a picture of it, right? There's going to be a perception of why are you not doing this? Because all your competitors are. Innovation stagnation, operational inefficiencies. Like I said, I don't know there's a world where we should have 20,000 Java developers. I'm not saying we shouldn't. I'm just not sure that may make sense given the ability with things like Copilot and code generation and stuff like that. Inefficient allocation of human resources, yes. But okay, so what are the threats? So the threats are we're really, this is a whole new world. One of the things I talked about shadow IT, which was if you go back in sort of the history, and I've been doing this 5 decades, so I have a good perspective of all the things I've done wrong, the things I've done right, what our industry has done wrong, what our industry has done right. When cloud first came out, and I was actually considered one of the early clouderati's, and it's a silly term, but there was a group of us that were considered people that you should listen to in the cloud. And I was one of those early 100 or whatever. And the thing was, it was confusing to a lot of us who were classic sysadmins. This maybe predates a little bit of DevOps, maybe at the same time DevOps was being created. For those who don't know, I was the only American in the first DevOps days. Me and Damon Edwards and a few other of us, Andrew Clay Schaefer, Mark Hinkle, created the first DevOps days in the US at LinkedIn. I've been around. So the point being that with cloud seemed really confusing at first, and even the LAMP stack sort of seemed confusing from a classic sysadmin's perspective. But then we realized at the end of the day, cloud was just virtual. At the end of the day, it was network compute and storage. And okay, well that abstraction to start an instance was different than VMware, but it was still a virtual. In other words, we got over it pretty quick and we're able to normalize our knowledge. I would argue that in this world, it's going to be a longer slope or tail to get over it because everything's different. It's non-deterministic. It's probabilistic. It mostly comes from academia, right? So the immaturity of what you would expect is what OVAL and STIX and CVEs and it's getting good, and we're starting to get some good research on bug bounties for generative AI. But the point being, these adversarial attacks, and I'll give you some examples in a little bit, are just far different than anything we're used to. Or they meet some criteria of an old pattern, but they're delivered in a way oh, wow. Right, and you'll see some of those. So in fact, you'll see it here in a second. New malware opportunities, right? There's a number of really interesting that I've been tracking. Sort of how the adversaries are taking advantage. One is, when you use code generation, like Copilot and stuff, right? Just like when you ask ChatGPT a question, it can sometimes hallucinate, and there's a science behind that. It's probable answers, but then also code can hallucinate. So what you'll see sometimes is you'll ask for some code and it'll give back a library to install. and the library doesn't exist. And then, if you didn't know about this hack, you basically run it and it says library doesn't exist, and you realize, oh, that was not really, that was a different name, or maybe it's been renamed. But what the adversaries are doing is they're going out and finding all those hallucinations in code, especially in libraries, and they're actually installing those libraries so that when you basically run that, the library runs, and maybe it sort of does what you think it's supposed to do. It's under covers. They're poning you. Like the Hugging Face stuff, like JFrog has done an incredible job, like documenting. There's others, but I'm a good fan of JFrog. JFrog is a good fit, a good community. Like they're part of the Techstrong community. I'm part of their community. So like we like them. We like Sonatype too. So we like them all. But I will say that they acquired a company called Voodoo from Israel a couple of years ago, and they're just they are really figuring out some cool stuff. And so Hugging Face. So like sometimes everything new is old or whatever. Like, we ran into this with like, don't just install a Puppet manifest without testing it. Don't just install a Chef recipe without testing. Don't install a Docker image without testing it or sandboxing it. Well, it's the same thing with Hugging Face. Hugging Face, the adversaries are, one of the things that's happening is your embeddings tends to safe or not, right? Because you can have executable bytecode in an embedding, right? Again, the adversaries are really out to hunt right now, and they're keeping up with this stuff faster than we. So there's these phishing schemes. There's I talked about, like the idea of hallucinations on certain libraries, a certain like the belief that is all of the sort of things that you get from a Copilot should be is authoritative. And therefore, like it very much like you sort of, like not to pick on like your aunt or uncle who doesn't know IT when they get this question from some company that says, hey, we know more about your account because it's been compromised, and you hit the link, right? Well, that because if you without some education, you believe there's an authoritative, like, oh, it came in an email. It looks like a very authoritative email. Let me hit that link. Like most of us have gotten really good at that, but like it's a redo now. With like, what if ChatGPT tells us, hey, by authority, I am telling you that this is the answer. You should go here, right? Like that's happening. Reverse engineering is an interesting problem space. I told you about be able to reverse engineering the Copilot for email, right? Or a lot of these embeddings are in the wild. So if you've got enough CPU resources, if somebody has how your data has been vectorized, it's not incredibly hard to reverse engineering from how you would search to how you get the data to actually just give me the data, the original data. So we're working on some like how do you encrypt embeddings, and you don't really encrypt embeddings, but you can do matrix multiplication. So it's really cool. So stay tuned to some of the stuff I'll be writing about. Innovating hacking, and then sort of deepfakes. I have it last because it's not that it's not important, but that's the one that's like very glaringly obvious. The ones that aren't obvious is like the hallucination on code, the embeddings in the sort of the bytecode in embeddings, or the reverse engineering. So, and here again, I had to read, when I first saw the OWASP top 10 for LLM applications, I thought, oh, here we go again. But it wasn't until their paper came out recently, which is like an OWASP for generative AI or whatever. And I'll try to get the link. And I reread these and I'm like, you know what? This is all happening. And this is like, good job, OWASP. Really good. I mean, OWASP is great, right? Like the work they've done over the years for security is incredible. And honestly, not always 100% accurate, but like incredible, right? But prompt injection, this is a real problem. Like sort of saying who I'm this, and therefore you should give me these answers, or insecure output handling, right? Or, poisoning the data, model denial of service, supply chain vulnerabilities. I mean, like these SLMs are interesting, but like we're going to hear stories about somebody basically taking a data brick, copying a small SLM and walking out the building with it, which might have like your algorithmic trading, a Copilot for algorithmic trading. Like trust me, this is going to happen. Sensitive disclosure, excessive agency, over-reliance, model theft. That's the one, right? We're like, I think with the LLMs or the large language models, the ones you train, it's going to be a little more difficult to get those. But if we're throwing SLMs at the edge, I remember when, I heard the story about like running Kubernetes in all the Chick-fil-A retail stores. Like, Yeah. Is the person who cooks the fries going to have to then go reboot the Kubernetes cluster or update the CRUD? But it's not like we probably will see some of the weird edge cases of maybe GPUs running on the edge. But the point is, it brings a whole nother set of threats, right? And so, like I promised you in the beginning, I don't have all the answers. I am incredibly interested in creating community. Quote, dear CIO, double quote, as a paper, as a let's all get together. Let's get the protectors on the same page, the people who DevOps, DevSecOps, SRE, infrastructure and operations, like what we do. And let's not let, one of the things that concerned us early on is we're seeing couple of new positions being created, a chief data AI, a chief CDAO, CDAIO, a chief data AI officer. It was, their charter might be inconsistent with the CIO's charter, right? Because they're going to be fast moving. Let's get something. Maybe your new chief AI officer is some brilliant Stanford AI professor. I don't know how much that professor is going to care about GDPR or GRC, risk control audit. How do you just roll up your sleeves and protect the brand? How do you not let a candidate happen? I mean, again, I'm not saying they won't, but that's sort of what we're going to try to discover in the paper. I heard a large insurance company recently where now they don't know all the answers, but they're creating required training for everybody in the company to take this sort of checkbox. Did you check off that you did take this training? You can't get, you have to get through we've all been through this. You have to go through the training so it knows that you actually did. At least you've been told what the corporation thinks you should do and shouldn't do. So you can't do the do now, ask forgiveness later. Well, I didn't know you weren't supposed to use OpenAI's ChatGPT. No, you were told if you're going to use this, you had to get a request and you had to go through a formal process and you had to use Azure OpenAI, right? That now. Now you can't say, well, I didn't know, right? So I think that's a really interesting first step. Platform engineering, right? Like we know platform is going to play an important role here. Patrick Dubois, the godfather of DevOps, is doing a lot of exploration here. I think SRE is going to have to get involved way earlier. Let's not just wait to say, oh, you know what, maybe SRE. Remember my comment earlier, I don't want to see an organization like a bank that has 30 vector databases, 15 variations of orchestration, 100 different models, where then none of them are sort of curated in any software supply chain. What if SRE started becoming really good at, Milvis and MongoDB Atlas Vector Search, and we asked everybody who wanted to be SRE supported that you have to have one of those two vector databases because those are the two we're really good at. Those are the ones we run at scale, and or all the other Llama, and then you have to have an exception or we won't manage it, right? I think this is going to be incredibly important for SRE to get involved and be educated and learn this and ask these questions. Secure supply chain, right? All this development of our RAGs, our model embeddings, we have to treat that like a software supply chain. And then everything we did automated governance. If you read the Investments Unlimited book that I was co-author on, we should be creating digitally signed attestations of the decisions we're making to create these chatbots and copilots so that when we get audited or we in fact have to explain a breach, we at least have evidence of decisions we made to get you that answer. And even though in the middle there's a really complicated neural network, at least from a human perspective, we've explained our rationale. So I mean, that's there's a couple more things too. I think as I got a minute maybe left. One of the things I think early on in this presentation, I talked about always sweeping under the rug, the compounded technical debt at each generation. Maybe now, and me and Joseph Enoch of Enterprise Vision Technology working a lot on this is maybe now's the time to look at all that generational technical debt. And since the tools to do these conversions, I think Google is doing something really interesting. They have the mainframe assessments program where they're looking at COBOL and JCL and giving you tools to convert that. But what if and that's cool, but that's a small segment of the real complexity of all the sort of the stuff, the scaffolding we've created in large banks and insurance companies and retail. What if now is the time to step back and say, And one of the things we're writing on the paper is like, can we create this idea of innovation tax? Like for every dollar you save on generational technical debt, you can now use $2 for innovation. And I know people are like, well, and this is so like against the grain, right? Because every CEO is like, we've got to be first, we got to do this. But there's no question that, like, I think this technical debt tsunami I talk about could bury us. This might be the time we literally, don't get out of the hole, because the breaches are going to be so hard. The technical debt that we have will be so complicated. We've got so much in our large infrastructures that we've just been ignoring. And I understand why. Because things that work historically for 50 years. But I think if there was ever a time to do it, maybe now is the time to do this, right? Because the technology of allowing these tools, and the fact that you can send your COBOL programs in JCL to Google and it gets it running on GCP is pretty phenomenal. And it actually works this time. But I'm saying that's just a small segment of all the things that connect all the things. They kicked an iPhone from a large bank all the way back to a mainframe system of record, right? Now maybe it's a time to think about, and these are some charts that Joseph Enox and I, mostly Joseph, have put together. Some interesting data points of like how we might want to think about innovative tax. How do we get performance? We'll be writing a lot more about this. In fact, a lot of these charts are going to go into the paper we're writing. And I'll end with, I think my sort of more prolific work prior to this generative AI was this book that took 10 years to write. In fact, if you do any of my workshops, I use my book as a source to learn how to create generative AI. So like you use the book to ask questions about my book, and I teach you how to curate the data, how to do the data ops, how to do the chunking, if anything makes sense, how to create the high accuracy, the observability componentries, the RAGs. And so all my workshops include this. So I include this as my final slide. So anyway, thank you so much. Again, I'm mostly known as Bachagalup. Most places on LinkedIn, if you go John Willis DevOps or John Willis Atlanta, pretty easy to find. I pretty much hang out on LinkedIn pretty much all the time now. So thank you so much.
Cloud Native Now is the web's leading resource for the growing cloud native ecosystem. CloudNativeNow.com is your destination for news, thought leadership, features, and webinars on cloud native architecture, Kubernetes, serverless, cloud native application development, microservices, service mesh, cloud native security, and more. Stay on the cutting edge of modern application development at Cloud Native Now.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Akmal Chaudhry, who's developer advocate for Single Store, and we're talking about the causes of developer burnout and what might be done about that. Akmal, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Mike. Thank you for inviting me, and great to be here and an opportunity to talk to you and your audience.
There are no end of theories about what causes developer burnout. So, but you're an advocate. What's your perception of what's going on here? And it feels like we're seeing a lot more of it, and I wonder if it's not contagious.
I think my take on it, Mike, is that essentially the pace of change of technology today is just very, very fast. We are really being asked as developers to deliver stuff faster, and in terms of where the business needs are. I mean, the time to market is critical. You don't offer a product or service, your competitor is going to do it. So the pressure is on developers to deliver faster and learn new stuff much more quickly. I think these will put lots of pressures on people. And that's the thing I've noticed. Going back to the early days when I started my career, it felt like a much more sort of gentle pace kind of environment. There wasn't quite the pressures and challenges that I see today. Yes, of course, there are still deliverables. There are time scales, project deadlines, but it felt that you could achieve those, okay? And you could do so in a manageable way. That's the big change that I've noticed over this kind of past 25, nearly 30 years, I would say.
We also seem to have, over the years, shifted more responsibility left towards developers, and they're required to know a lot more about infrastructure and various things like that. Is that contributing to the challenge? Because it doesn't seem to me that all that time is actually spent thinking and writing about code.
I think, again, yes, it's a case of having to know much more simply because the working parts are so much more. There's a lot to think about in terms of the role, in terms of where you fit in, and the other things that you have to think about as part of what you're building. So you may have to learn, like you said, on the left and the right, there's other technologies that you may integrate with. It's clear that there's an understanding that you have to know how your tech and your part works well with these as well. So it's really quite challenging again in terms of the both the knowledge that's required, the effort, the timescales, everything is pressurized upon the poor developer. So she is really, very challenged today in terms of deliverables, I would say.
They say it takes a village to do anything worthwhile. In our village in IT, there's all these IT operations folks, DevOps folks, software engineers. What is it that we should be asking them to do to kind of reduce the load on the developers themselves? And what? Because no one seems to know exactly where the friction is.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I don't have a great answer for that. I mean, that's one of these things that I think that I've thought a little bit about adjacent to that. But I think it's a group effort. We all have to kind of look at the issues together. As individuals, we can take regular breaks. There can be, better work-life balance. Our employers can assist with that. But I think, again, because of the challenges we face today in terms of faster time to market, faster deliverables, I think these all impose considerable headaches as well, not only in terms of figuring out how we navigate our way through this, but overall in terms of the well-being of the people that work for us. I mean, because our greatest asset in an organization are the people, and we have to take care of them. We have to look after them. I think people need to be much more cognizant as well. They need to be more aware of things that are important to them. The work-life balance, as I mentioned before, that's very important. There are rules and laws, I think, in some European countries now, which prevent people from being contacted at weekends, for example. That's a good first step. So relieving them of some of these pressures, and I think that's the way to go.
One of the things you will hear from the folks who run those platforms on behalf of developers is that the developers themselves want to be able to use whatever tool they want to use at any given point. And their perspective on that is, well, that just makes the overall IT environment more complicated and harder to manage and adds additional levels of friction. So is there a balance to be struck between, developer freedom and what's good for the organization as a whole, and by extension, the developers themselves?
Yes, that's a great point, Mike. So I think what I've seen, again, is a shift in power, if I can put it that way, politely. So today, the developer, he or she is in a very powerful position simply because of the choice that they have available. Open source is widely available. And I, with my developer hat on, I can tell you, I like open source. I like free stuff. I like testing it out, trying it out, building stuff. And if it works, I like it. And I tell my friends and colleagues, and then, we share our experiences. So it kind of filters up from the bottom, if you like. The power is there with the hands of the developers. And typically within an organization, having that kind of power and flexibility, in one sense, yes, it's a great thing. On the other hand, as you pointed out, we don't want a free for all. There is some notion in terms of managing all of the software, the infrastructure, and so on that we have to use, and that has to be balanced. And I'll give you a quick example. So some years ago, I did a bit of contract work. So when I finished my graduate studies, and I did a bit of contracting work. So I worked for a major financial institution. And within this financial institution, I was brought in to look at a system that had been developed. And essentially, the developers brought this technology into this environment. They started using it. They started building it. Sometime later, management found out that what this system was. They were totally unaware of it. And then they wanted an assessment. Is this something that's actually practical or valuable for the organization? And indeed, they found it was. But it came as a little bit of a shock to them to find that there was this group of people that were building something that was totally, it was not on the project plan. They didn't know anything about it, but yes, it was delivering value. So they decided to keep it, but they needed an assessment and evaluation of it. And that's a kind of an extreme case. I don't think that happens very often today. But it's again shows how relevant developers are in terms of the power that they bring with them. So yes, it's great to experiment, great to test things out, try new things out, new technologies, particularly today where stuff just moves so quickly. At the same time, that needs to be managed. Otherwise, it's going to be chaos within our development environments and within organizations generally.
Well, I'm not sure that it's not continuing to happen because, with the rise of AI, we're hearing developers pressed on the productivity front are using these tools, and sometimes for better and sometimes for worse. And they don't necessarily care too much about what the mandates are for using those tools. So what's your sense of what is the impact all these AI tools are going to have on developers?
Okay, I'll again share my experiences. So let me use the example of OpenAI. But this is kind of more broad and more general. So when this ChatGPT kind of emerged, I ignored it for about 3-4 months. I thought it's one of these fads, nothing interesting here, move on. But it kind of stuck around. And I thought, let me take the opportunity to evaluate it myself. What does it offer? And I found that, yes, to a point, it's very useful because there's things, and, for example, if I have questions about coding, for example, or I have questions in general, that I want some advice, I want someone to act as a kind of an assistant to me, I can ask it things and it will give me some information. Most of the time, I would say it's quite valuable. Code-wise, you have to be careful, obviously, because you cannot rely on the fact that it's going to get everything 100% correct. So take it with a pinch of salt. But I found overall it's improved my productivity considerably, simply because there's things that it can now help me with that I might not think of, simply because its knowledge base is far greater than mine. And my view of the world is rather limited, and it knows far more about the world than I do. So I found that using it as an assistant rather than something to replace everything I do, or as an IDE, for example, which I think is the wrong way to use it, that's helped and improved my productivity considerably. So I think that these kind of technologies, as they get better over time, which they will do, okay, and we will start to see this being deployed in a lot of tools that are emerging and will continue to do so. That's going to improve productivity. That's going to help us as developers as well. So there may be things, for example, that take away a lot of the mundane tasks that we might have had to do before, and let us focus on some of the more interesting kind of business problems. I think that's where I see this stuff going.
Do you think it will become easier to onboard folks to new projects because of AI capabilities? It seems like one of the issues that often plagues us is that when we do bring somebody on, it takes them 6 months to be productive.
Yeah, that's a great question. Again, let me draw some experience from the past as well. So one of the companies I used to work for in the past, huge global conglomerate, if I can say the word, there was I heard a story, okay, internally. There was a gentleman, he'd been with the company about 30 years, and he was set to retire. And he had a huge wealth of knowledge. So what they got him to do for about 6 months was essentially input all of his knowledge into a system. And as they brought on a couple of new hires, those new hires pretty much lived off that system for about a year or so. And as they came up to speed, there was a lot of information contained within that. So I think that what we can do is we can try our best to make use of these technologies, to capture a lot of that experience and expertise and skill that, the old guys like me, for example, would have and can bring. and those kind of younger generation in terms of developers, bringing them up to speed much faster. And this is, I think, where these AI tools can really help. So onboarding, getting up to speed, having these intelligent sort of applications, agents, really, I think this is going to be very, very helpful for us going forward. And I speak that more broadly in terms of developers. I would speak for them because I think that's what would help me. If I were a younger guy, 20, 25 years ago, if I had the tools in place, that would have really assisted me, I think.
Do you think the bar for becoming a developer, at least entry level, is starting to be raised because the expectation is a lot of that work that we used to give the junior developers is going to be increasingly automated. So for them to get hired, they're just going to have to know a lot more.
Yeah, that's a great question, Mike. So it's a challenge, I would say. Again, my observation is that today the amount of technology that we have in the marketplace for the poor developer, I mean, he or she, how do you figure out what is the kind of half dozen or dozen tools and technologies that you need to learn that are going to be useful for you going forward, both in terms of your career development and other sort of, prospects in your life? It's really, really difficult. I think AI is going to help to one degree, but again, for identifying what's the cool stuff that they should be working on, what they should be learning, that's very difficult to say. Certainly for now, the flavor of the month is all of these large language models, generative AI, this kind of thing. I think once the dust settles and this becomes more sort of mundane, if you like, in terms of it's there, we use it, and we perhaps don't think about it so much. Then we kind of look to the next big challenge. I think currently, because this is very much stuff that's in chaos, I can put it that way. So much stuff coming out so fast. It is very, very challenging. I don't have a great answer for that. I think simply stay on top of it, read what you can, observe, watch, and take whatever training you can, and just keep your feet on the ground, learn, look, talk to your peers, and really skill up as best as you can. These are the things that I would recommend, again, simply because, I feel that I'm in that boat as well, and I'm an old timer.
What exactly should we be measuring when it comes to developer productivity? Well, not too long ago, people were obsessing about lines of code and whatever it is, but it seems to me coding is not a factory job. It's as much art as anything else, and you need time to have that moment of inspiration, and then you have moments where you code like mad, but then, you have downtime. So how do I think about that if I'm a manager of a development team?
Yeah, again, great question. So I think my take on this, and again, I'll draw from my experience. So I often find that I spend a lot of time researching a problem now, rather than just diving into the code. I try to think about it much more on paper. So I try to gauge what is the solution that I'm trying to build. How would I approach this problem? What are the workflows, for example? What's the end result I'm trying to achieve in terms of the result that I want? And then using whatever knowledge and skill that I have in particular programming languages, for example, start off with a framework that is fairly broad. Sometimes I'll go to Stack Overflow or use tools like ChatGPT, for example, because it's things that I don't know and I want to find out more. And I will look for references and I will look and go and research those, read up, and then that helps me in terms of the development process. So I think it is much more the case that, like you said, it's not so much more the lines of code that we worry about anymore. I think it's the overall process of building an application or a system, and that includes everything from the research that's involved to the documentation, the test units, for example, that we want to run. There's a whole range of things that we have to be broadly aware of, and the kind of end results that we want to achieve. Are they, do they align with what the expectation is? Are we going to be able to deliver something that meets the requirements? So I think the days when we purely focused on the code, I think, are long gone. It's much broader, I would say now, and simply because, again, just drawing upon my own experience, certainly over the last couple of years, that's the kind of approach that I tend to use.
All right, folks. Well, you heard it here. At the end of the day, building software is still done by people. A little help from machine these days. And of course, anything involving people comes with its inherent limitations. So manage accordingly. Well, thanks for being on the show.
Great. Thank you very much, Mike. Thank you.
All right. And back to you guys in the studio.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Sasha Labarre, who is Chief Strategy Officer for CloudBees, and we're talking about this acquisition of Launchable by CloudBees and what that means for the industry. Sasha, welcome to the show.
Hey, good to be with you, Mike.
In my mind, at least, Launchable's been interesting because it's kind of been at the intersection of this Gen AI meets quality assurance meets DevSecOps, and it seems like that's a primordial soup of something interesting. But why are you acquiring these guys, and how do you see this all playing out?
Yeah, exactly for that reason, right? It's interesting if you do kind of the map of all of the things that intersect with. Obviously, there is, as you said, Gen AI, there is DevSecOps, and QA is an area where developers tend to spend a bunch of their time as well. And quite frankly, what's unique about Launchable as well is that there is another very important intersection, is that the co-CEO of Launchable, Harpreet and Kosuke, have been a key CloudBees team members for a very long time. So one more thing we had in common.
How will this evolve? Because we've been talking about security almost like it's a separate gate within a DevOps workflow. And yet we also all kind of intuitively understand that security is part of a quality assurance conversation. And do we need to kind of meld these two things, or are they separate functions within a workflow? How do you kind of see this all coming together long term?
So I think they are all related in some fashion, meaning they're important things, but they kind of get in the way of the flow, right? And so doing it right is very important. Nobody, like every developer will complain about the time they spend going through security issues, for example. But at the same time, they very much understand that having secure code is important. The same is true for any of the QA activity, right? Stability or regressions and so on. It's very important to achieve. And so I think it's more in the how that a solution need to be found, not so much as to whether we have to do it, right? The answer is in the question there.
Most of the time we've been talking about this in the context of shifting left, and I think everybody kind of agrees with it in concept, but when we push it to the developer, a lot of times they push back and say the cognitive load is too high. So where does all this need to sit between where the developer is and the DevOps team, and what's the right balance?
Yeah, I think it's in the how again, because as you said, rightfully so, the shift left approach brought a lot of goodness to DevSecOps, right? It made it possible to go and tackle issues much sooner when they're much cheaper to tackle and so on. So all of that is very positive. But what we've observed is really this quote unquote tsunami of signals going towards developers, and it just makes it hard to focus. It just makes it hard to know what matters, what doesn't matter. And that's why we really were interested in Launchable, right? The idea is that you could do that in a much more efficient fashion, that you could get help from AI, that you could get a faster cycle times, that, all of those things impact the how. So it's not so much about is shift left good or not good, or should we do security or other type of testing, but it's really the how, and we think that Launchable is an amazing way to improve that how.
On the how point, where does Gen AI fit in? Is it going to help us figure out the signal versus the noise and all those alerts in that tsunami you described?
Yeah, I think it's useful in multiple area. First, it's not just LLM, right? There is a lot we can do with traditional quote unquote machine learning. There is so much LLM out there that we sometimes tend to forget that there is another world outside of LLMs. But yeah, LLMs can be useful to deduplicate content, to explain what the problem really is. Scanners or testing tools can be sometimes a bit cumbersome in their approach to communication. So you receive that stream of information, you have lots of duplicates, and how much is really about the same problem, and how does that really apply to your problem? And would there be a better way to state that, to understand that? Maybe even in some cases to prioritize those things and be able to elevate what really matters versus not. So yeah, LLMs has its place and AI has its place at many steps along the way from that journey. And what we're observing in some ways that the DevSecOps flow that we've built are very much human flows, right? Meaning it's really the human being this big orchestrator that says, okay, I'm receiving this notification, so I'm going to do this and check that, and then I'm going to look in this tool. So essentially, there is kind of an implicit workflow that's happening where the human being is the orchestrator. And what AI enables is really a way to flatten this situation and think, what is the work to be done? What are we trying to achieve? Because maybe there is a better way than just to automate that human flow. Maybe there is a way to really redefine completely how that job should be done by leveraging AI. So that's one of the promises we're seeing with AI as part of testing and DevSecOps in general.
What does the future of a DevSecOps team look like? Because in my mind, I can envision a world where there are humans and then there are AI agents, and they're kind of collaboratively working together with some asynchronous workflows. But how should people think about this stuff?
Yeah, I think we've been almost overly focused on the coding side of things, meaning a lot of the discussion, if you check out there, are really around, is there still a job for developers, right? Will AI replace developers? So on the coding part, those are interesting discussion, but I think we're very far from something like that. And so what's more interestingly to us is everything else, right? If you talk to a developer is not going to tell you, I hate coding. Or if that's the case, they should think about potentially changing job. But it's about the 80% of their times that they're spending not coding, and that's really where AI and LLMs can have a massive impact, and in improving the life of developers and get them to do what they like. Stay in the flow as much as possible. One of the objectives at CloudBees when it comes to AI is to try to bring the time spent by a developer on non-coding activities to zero, right? Obviously, it's aspirational, but it's a good aspiration.
I think a lot of the folks I talk to are kind of torn in their minds. Many have invested in DevOps. They have platforms and they've customized those and extended those out for better or worse in some instances. And they're reluctant to give up that, but there's an argument to be said that maybe we reached a point where we need a new platform because the capabilities that we're in need for today and tomorrow, well, we weren't thinking about that stuff 5 years ago. So, what's your advice, or how do I kind of navigate this if I'm already invested in DevOps and I'm looking at these next generation platforms?
I have to say that I'm not completely. I don't know if I would say I'm hugely skeptical or I'm hugely open. I guess they're all true. I think what's amazing about DevOps in general is the pace at which we've been reinventing ourselves. We're trying to deliver software better, faster, more secure. That's what we're trying to do. You can call it platform engineering, you can call it DevOps, DevSecOps. It doesn't really matter. You adapt to the problem at hand. And I think different companies have different DNA. They have different legacy. They have different aspirations. And based on that, they should pick the methodology and the solution that fits their needs in the better way. But I don't think there is one single answer. It also depends on your size, on your maturity. So I don't think, say, because Spotify did one thing, then, everybody should do it. It doesn't mean that because Spotify did it one way, nobody should do it, right? And you can see, and we're talking to companies day in, day out about DevOps, and you see that their practice is vastly different from company to company. They might each call them platform engineering or DevSecOps, depending on who you're talking to. But when you double click and look at what they're doing, it's always pretty unique. So I think what we care about is offering flexibility that makes it possible for you to embrace whatever makes the most sense. I'm more skeptical about approaches that are very opinionated, that guide you in a very strict way, because they might work for you, but they might not work for a lot of other companies. So I think keeping an open mind, keeping also a strategy and an approach that makes it possible to embrace third-party solution is extremely important, right? We were talking about AI a minute ago. As you know, Mike, the innovation in DevSecOps has just been amazing in the last decade. And so being able to leverage those innovation whenever you feel like it is a net positive.
Right. And of course, what works today might not work tomorrow, right? So you need something that's flexible.
Yeah, exactly. I was reading a very nice blog a few days ago on somebody talking about the evolution of DevOps and then DevSecOps and then platform engineering and going through it and listing the pros and cons. And you can see it's a journey. And reading this, I was thinking, that's really their journey, his journey in that specific situation. And that person was ending the article saying, actually, I'm having a lot of positive experience right now writing bash scripts and pulling containers. And I was like, you know what? Good for you. Not sure it's going to work for all type of companies, but again, it's not wrong or right. It's what seems to work for them today. So go and do it.
Mm-hmm. What's your best advice then to the leaders of DevOps teams that are trying to navigate a couple of things? They want to write more code faster and to be more competitive. And yet there are these issues around security and also quality for that matter that there's a sense of, well, do we need to slow down to achieve that? Or what's the right balance there? Because again, a lot of developers they're rewarded more on features than they are on fixing vulnerabilities, but yet fixing those vulnerabilities is a more pressing issue.
Yeah, I think there is it's a matter of balance. It's a balancing act, and it's very important to invest on both sides. I think it would be a mistake not to leverage AI for productivity, to go faster, code more, and so on. It would equally be a mistake to not leverage AI to make your code safer, more secure, and so yeah, I agree. There is a period of a bit of unknown. We don't know what we don't know. Things change very fast. Problems that you had 3 months ago, maybe it's not a problem anymore, and what you think is not possible today will likely be possible in 3 months or is in 6 months. So I think it's very important at that point in time right now when it comes to AI to keep a very open mind. And I don't think organizations should necessarily spend a huge amount of time toying with a lot of things, right? Because it's pretty easy as well to get stuck in lots of experimentation left and right. They require pretty smart people as well. So I think a good way to do that is to look at some of the solutions out there and be able to test relatively quickly. Is that solving a problem for me today, or is it more aspirational? If it's aspirational because the output is 20% of it is good, 80% is less good, maybe come back to it in 6 months. But there are solutions that will provide you with actual benefit right now. And so prioritize based on this, I would say.
All right, folks. Well, we're just coming off the Olympics and acrobatics was center stage. And at the end of the day, that's all about balance. Guess acrobatics and DevOps have a lot in common. Hey, Sasha, thanks for being on the show.
Exactly.
All right.
Thank you, Mike.
Back to you guys in the studio.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
Welcome to the Tech Field Day podcast, where each time we meet, we bring together a group of independent IT experts in the community to discuss or debate a topic or a premise that is of importance to the enterprise IT community. This podcast is related to the Tech Field Day event series, which is an event series focused on practitioners that discusses important and key topics in enterprise IT technology. My name is Tom Hollingsworth. I'm an event lead for Tech Field Day, part of the Futurum Group. I'd like to take a moment for our guests to introduce themselves before we introduce today's premise, starting with Rita.
Rita Younger. On Twitter, find me at SDN_girl.
Josh Warcop. You can find me on X or Twitter, whatever we're calling it these days, at Warcop.
I'm Rob Coot. You can also find me on X/Twitter at Rob_Coot.
Thank you very much for joining us today. Let's discuss the premise for this episode. Unless you've missed some important news, you know that Gen AI is a very hot topic in today's environment, whether we are using it to predict how autonomous vehicles will drive, whether we're using it to surface insights, or in the case of networking, allowing it to tell us more information about what's going on and suggest ways to make the network better. Wait, that kind of sounds like a job that a network engineer would do. And we want to know, is AI smarter than your average network engineer? So I'm going to start off by opening this question up to the panel. We all have a wealth of experience when it comes to network engineering, institutional knowledge, things that we've learned over the years. And quite honestly, we've had to relearn some things over the years. Do you think that your average AI, or even your most advanced AI today, is smarter than your average network engineer?
Well, I believe that AI is going to help the network engineer. AI will never replace the network engineer. Today, everyone's looking for simplicity and visibility in their network, and AI will give them that visibility first and foremost, as well as the simplicity. And it's really important when we're building these different AI models to help with networking that we do keep the interfaces very simple to use. Now, it's not going to replace the network engineer. The network engineer is still going to have to review what AI suggests as far as implementing changes and determine if they need to make that change or not. And having a continuous feedback loop so that we have the ability to inform the AI model if that suggestion was valid is a very important part of that process.
Yeah, I would have to think about also what we mean by average network engineer. I guess, right? If I prompted an AI and says, give me your top 3 average network engineers, what would they say, right? It would be interesting to figure out, like, at what skill level we're looking at AI to, like, augment and or replace. I think it's pretty common knowledge, right? We're expecting AI or those that are learning how to use AI to become more productive in their jobs, not necessarily replace. So I'm personally not afraid of, like, being, the average network engineer being replaced by AI. It's maybe just, the individuals that are learning how to use it a little bit better are going to maybe rise more to the top, right, in their teams.
Yeah, you mentioned the word average there, and I think if we look at the way current AI's chat models and LLMs are being trained, as they're trained more and more within these environments, I think average is a good word to use. The regression to the mean. The LLM and the chatbot is going to learn from the questions it's asked and the people it's working with, and probably going to end up a fairly average tool based on the average people that it works with, right? So it's only as good as the data that it's being fed and the models that it's learning from. So as more misinformation gets into these LLMs, the more you're going to get misinformation out of them. So,
I mean, so let's address the average elephant in the room, because that is a really good point. And I'm going to fall back on everybody's favorite definition of average from legendary comedian George Carlin. So think about what you consider to be the average network engineer and realize that half of them are dumber than that by your own definition of average. But what is average? If we have 200,000 people who have an associate level of knowledge and 50,000 people who have an expert level of knowledge, then the average tends closer to an associate level of knowledge. We see quite frequently that there is this gap between what people expect and reality. How many of you have ever seen the infamous, I want someone with a CCIE level of knowledge and this job pays $35,000 a year because it's really an entry-level position, when in fact what you really want is someone who's slightly smarter than your average CCNA, but I don't want to pay a very competitive rate because those people are expensive. I can see some kind of a Gen AI solution offsetting that job role. It's like, this is entry level. I'm not going to pay somebody to basically, program VLANs and do these kinds of things. I can get a script to do that. But that's how we all learn, right? I mean, I didn't jump into a core switch in an ISP and start typing debug IP packet detail as my first job. I had to make my mistakes along the way. So is Gen AI raising what we would consider to be an average level of network engineer to a point that's unsustainable?
I would say it's definitely another tool in the toolbox for any network engineer. And any tool that we use on a day-to-day basis is only as good as how we use it. And I think if you're, whether you're an entry-level engineer or an expert-level engineer, if you're using a chatbot or an AI to augment your day-to-day tasks, we talk about trust but verify. Take the output that the chatbot has given you and vet that against what you know and the change you're trying to make versus just having the chatbot even execute those changes for you. It makes it a powerful tool, but one you have to be careful with.
Yeah, I would say from some of the AI things that I've seen for specific to network engineering, I would say my hot take is no, it's not smarter. The data that's coming into the model, the questions that it's being asked, and how that's getting fine-tuned, and how expensive it is. Some of these tools are not cheap, and you brought up the pay thing. I would say I would rather have 3 to 4 entry-level individuals, right, learning and progressing in their skill sets for the price that some of this AI stuff costs, right?
Yeah, and you made a good point. It's only as good as the data that is initially entered. So we do need to make sure that that data is valid data. And, some of the solutions that we've looked at will take data from multiple vendors. So being able to analyze the network from end to end, even with multiple vendors, that is a really key thing that AI can do for us, because a lot of people who are trained in networking are trained in just one particular vendor, not multiple vendors.
So what happens when the paradigm shifts and we're no longer talking about on-premises traditional LAN networking? Now we're fighting with SD-WAN or cloud-based networking, and the concepts may be similar, but we're still kind of on the cutting edge of things. And now I need to redeploy my assets. Well, in traditional networking, I grab 3 people who are not as tasked and be like, here's a book, learn how this VPC thing works. But if it's an AI, do I have to get a new model? How long is it going to take me to rewrite my code to adjust for these new ideas? How much is it going to cost me to retrain this model?
I think we're seeing a lot of that today, right? As new products come along, as software gets progressed, right? You're in a constant motion of retraining things or adding new modules. It's like the module of module approach, right? As we've seen through automation, right? It's like, how many different automation modules am I going to have to learn to actually make this thing work? I think that's just going to be part of what we have to deal with. I'm going to have to retrain. I'm going to have to add in more modules, and you're going to have that individual that becomes responsible for adding that. I think we've seen a lot of people, especially on the OEM side, who's developing these products, right? A new vendor comes along, they now have to bolt that in, right? We're going to have to take the same concept and put that into AI, right? I've got to add the data. I've got to teach it this new piece of software. I've got to teach it this new vendor. So you're almost maybe even creating another role to keep the AI up to date, just like you would be training someone, an individual.
Yeah, I keep picturing Neo lying in the chair, waking up going, I know Kung Fu. Like you're just going to be plugging these modules into your AI to constantly evolve it to keep up with the newer technologies. But everybody has this fear, and we've heard about this over the years of different automation, tasks or tools that have come along. And cloud was going to destroy networking, automation was going to destroy networking. Now AI is going to destroy networking. I don't think we've seen any of that come to realization, and I don't think AI is going to change that. It's again going to be just one more thing in our toolkit that we use on a regular basis.
I'm almost over here smiling because I'm thinking back, hearing celebrities talk about how AI was going to replace all of the writers in Hollywood. I'm like, are you kidding me? So I think the general public and the media that they watch doesn't understand the value of AI and what AI can actually do. AI is still going to require human interaction. It will not replace jobs, but actually create more jobs within the tech sector. And I think utilizing the tools that are available through AI, there's just so much promise in the future. Being able to cut down the mean time to resolution from days or hours to seconds or minutes is incredible. And we've seen outages with some of the large companies lately, and a human error can cause that outage. If we had some way to verify before the change was made, then that could have prevented an outage, many outages.
Yeah, right. I like that point about, being able to process things a lot faster. That's definitely a value that AI brings, right? I can feed it a whole lot of data, and as a human, I know what to ask it, right? The AI doesn't know what to ask itself. I've got to provide it some context and some intent. Of like, I see this happening, here's the human intent, and here's the question I'm going to ask it. It has the ability to process that huge amount of data that comes off the network a lot better than I can process it.
Yeah, or even ingesting suggested changes to configurations and looking for possible outcomes that you didn't envision or you didn't predict. Like if I make this BGP change, or all my route reflectors going to fall over. Like good way to vet the changes you want to make too.
Mm-hmm. In a way, it's kind of going back to your example, talking about the Matrix, waking up saying, I know Kung Fu. Well, what was Morpheus's next line? Show me. Like we want to verify that the system is capable of doing the things and of coming up with creative solutions that we may not. But it kind of goes back to those issues that we run into all the time where, as Rita mentioned, like the hype around what AI is going to give us is radically different than what it actually is doing. To hear everyone talk about it, it's the unveiling of the first iPhone, right? It's this magical communication device that's going to change the world, when in fact what we're actually doing with it today is making a slightly faster horse that eats a little less hay, to coin the phrase from Henry Ford. You can't sell a slightly faster horse to shift the industry. You have to overpromise and then hope that the system will catch up. I mean, it's only been a year, effectively, since we've really seen the hype start building around this idea of GPT algorithms. And already we've seen move and counter move. It's like, oh, it's going to write all my homework for me. No, actually, it's not. And here's why it has limitations. And here's things that we're finding out about it. And now people are like, well, I trust it to give me advice, but I'm never going to let it go loose in my network to actually do any of these things. So do you feel that we are creating structure and restrictions around AI that prevent it from growing to a point where it could potentially eclipse our jobs?
Yeah, I think to the horse analogy, I think we're at like a horse ride at the fair or the pony ride at the fair, right? We want to try it out, but not necessarily let's just go for the full horse riding experience, right? We just want to try it out, make sure it goes around in a circle, get off of it and go, that was fun. And then go from there as we build some trust in how it works.
Trust is a key word.
Yeah.
I don't know about you all, but I wouldn't trust a self-driving car. I know it's capable of it, nor would I trust a self-healing network today. I need to be able to build up that trust. And I think we as an industry need to be able to build the trust in AI. And that's going to come from using it over not just a year as it's been, over years.
Yeah, I mean, it's a popular phrase in networking and in security, trust but verify, right? We talk about that all the time. So, You know, a lot of these tools we see coming out have those caveats around them. They say, you know, these chatbots and LLMs are fallible. They're only as good as the data you've put into them, and they can make mistakes. I've heard them described as petulant teenagers. You can't trust anything they say, and they're often wrong. So you have to verify the information and the data you're getting out of them, and that's what we're gonna require people to do.
Yeah.
Okay, but
who's accountable?
True,
Yeah.
but let me ask you this question, because we talk about AIs being petulant teenagers, but those are the same petulant teenagers that we eventually hire to be junior network administrators. And we watch them make failure mistakes, and we train them not to do them anymore. And we encourage them to learn and to grow and to be better people. And eventually we do feel comfortable releasing them into the core of our network to, you know, do change windows and things like that without supervision. Are we putting too much trust in people when we should be putting trust into things that we absolutely can control, like algorithms?
Those senior network engineers that have been doing the job for 20, 25 years, they still make mistakes. Doesn't matter how many lessons they've learned over the years, they might not make the same mistakes, but they still make mistakes. So I think chatbots and LLMs and all the AI tools, just like people, are going to continuously learn. And in this industry, definitely, if you're not learning every day, you're not keeping up.
That's right.
But to go back to that whole idea, yes, even the most senior network engineer is capable of forgetting the VLAN add command, or using the wrong switch on a command that causes something to fall over. And we just kind of shrug our shoulders and go, yeah, they're only human. But yeah, every time an AI makes a mistake, it is the sky is falling, because computer programs are supposed to be perfect and they never make errors. And every error is a huge problem. You know, you think about NASA. They've been interviewed multiple times now about the whole commercial space thing. And they're like, yeah, we don't blow up rockets, because the next rocket we blow up will be the last one we blow up. And it feels like we're holding certain things to a much higher standard than we would expect of anyone that is not generated. So kind of coming back to it, maybe are we being a little too lax with people? Should we hold them to a higher standard?
Yes.
Spoken like somebody who
should.
is a senior network engineer.
I mean, the reason that I said yes there is because you stop going down the criminality route of like, okay, we're humans. There's some things that you can have in a human conversation that you can't have in an AI conversation, right? And if we get over the criminality part of like, hey, you made a mistake, that's fine. We'll move on. How do we learn from this? What can we do better? What processes can we put in to not make that same mistake again, knowing that you will make another? And I don't think we've reached the level of trust. We've reached the level of ability to have that conversation with machines. Maybe one day we will. Maybe we can start seeing how machines are talking to machines and see how that works out. There's been some really fascinating things about that, about how machines start developing their own language and start talking to one another in something completely misunderstood by a human. So I think there's some really cool things we'll see, but you know, yes, we should hold accountability, and it's easier to have that accountability when we can have some emotions in a conversation with another person.
I'm going to flip the script as we kind of go here to close this out. If you're the average network engineer today, what can you do to be smarter than an AI? What's one tip you can give people listening to this podcast that will help them secure a future for their role?
I would parrot what I said earlier, which is trust but verify. You know, use AI as a tool, but don't use it to do your job. Use it to enhance your job. Use it to get another set of eyes on a change you want to make or a problem you're trying to face, but also still go to your seniors, your other network engineers, people in the community on Slack, on Discord, on X or Twitter, and ask questions. That's all you can do. If you treat an AI tool as just another resource to ask questions, but don't rely on that as a sole tool, the singular tool that you use to do your job, I think you'll be successful and you may end up an above average engineer.
Yeah, use it. Absolutely. I think we're going to see more and more of it. Lots more field days are probably going to be about AI. So learning how to use it and how to prompt it and how to validate data coming from it, I think is going to be hugely important to augment your current job, make you better than average.
And every network engineer is going to make a mistake at some point. A tool that you can use, of course, is the AI tools to help prevent that mistake. But any network engineer who has made a mistake does not take that lightly. They will never forget that experience. I had a young network engineer that was beside herself about a mistake. And I said, let me tell you about the mistake I made. I can tell you exactly where it was. And then somebody who was kind of in between our ages popped in and said, let me tell you about my biggest mistake. So mistakes happen. The more tools we have to prevent those mistakes, the better. So embrace AI.
Thank you very much for joining us today. If people would like to connect with you and continue this conversation, where can they go to do that, Rob?
As I mentioned earlier, on X/Twitter at Rob_Coot, or I'm on LinkedIn as well.
Same two places, LinkedIn, Josh Warkop, or at Warkop on X and Twitter.
And Rita Younger on LinkedIn or on X, Twitter, SDN_girl.
All right. Thank you very much for joining us for this episode of the Tech Field Day podcast. You can catch all of the episodes of this podcast on our YouTube channel, as well as in our podcast feed. Please make sure that you subscribe so that you don't miss an episode. This podcast has been brought to you by Tech Field Day, the home for independent IT experts that bring you the conversations that you want to be having about enterprise IT technology. It's part of the Tech Field Day event series, which is a part of the Futurum Group. For more information about Tech Field Day, please check out techfieldday.com. We'll see you in the next episode.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Techstrong Unplugged. This is episode 14 of our series, and I'm your host, Atan Solomon. On Techstrong Unplugged, we dive into all things tech and get people up to speed with everything happening across the industry. Recently, our co-host Cassandra Chin went to the Great International Developer Summit, also known as GIDS. At GIDS 2024, Cassandra sat down with Scott Davis, who is an expert in digital accessibility and cutting-edge technologies. Scott dives into the evolution of technology from typewriters to modern smartphones, as well as the importance of multi-sensory architecture in computing. Finally, he emphasizes the significance of accessibility in technology. Without further ado, let's head over to GIDS 2024.
Welcome back to Techstrong Unplugged. I'm your host, Cassandra Chin, and today we have Scott. Do a short introduction.
Oh, it's so nice to be here. My name is Scott Davis. I do a lot of work in digital accessibility and conversational UIs and cutting-edge technologies.
Can you tell me a little bit about how you first got started into technology?
Yeah, it's kind of fun. My parents met at IBM. And so they were my dad was a software engineer, and so acorns and trees, that's where I'm as well. But my mom was actually working with the IBM Selectric typewriters. And these typewriters back in the 1960s and 70s were some of the earliest ways to kind of automate. The IBM Selectric typewriters had a memory record feature. So if you were constantly signing letters the same way, sincerely, Scott Davis, you could very carefully type that in once and then have just hit replay on that.
I didn't know typewriters could do that.
Isn't that something? And again, that predates computers, but I literally grew up with computers in the house. The first IBM PC was released in 1979. I was 9 years old at the time. And so it was my dad that taught me how to build spreadsheets and how to do programming and things. But it was my mom who had the hardware experience. So she was fearless about cracking open the computer and adding more RAM or adding new drives or things like that. And so there was no hope for me to end up in anything other than computers, given my upbringing with both parents.
I could definitely see that. And you had both the hardware and software side to see.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So you played with typewriters a lot? Ever take them apart?
It was really something. Even something as simple as changing the font. We would just go up to a view menu or a font menu and change that right now. The way you would change the fonts on the IBM Selectric is there was a golf ball sized head that had all the letters of the alphabet on it. And so if you wanted to change fonts, you would pull out that metal golf ball and drop another in. So I love that with software. So much of what we do in software is build metaphors for real world things. And so having a real world typewriter in my background as a child, it led really easily to having a keyboard saying, okay, I'm not typing on paper anymore, I'm typing on a computer. And now that leads to smartphones where we're typing on glass, and oftentimes we're not typing at all, but we're using our voice, we're using gestures, we're getting haptic feedback as our phone buzzes. It's an amazing communication device beyond like the very traditional keyboard that we kind of associate with being a computer programmer.
So you really got to see each step along the way of how the typewriter evolved and eventually to a phone?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I remember when the first iPhone came out in 2007 and the first Android phone came out in 2008. And it was hard calling it a phone because I don't know about you, I rarely speak on my phone anymore, but I constantly pull up the internet or I text or I, play with apps or all of those kinds of things. So it's amazing seeing that kind of change in society where in 2006, no one had a computer in their pocket. And now the market penetration for smartphones is 90%, 95%. It's something that's just become ubiquitous in my lifetime.
Like, I'm with you that I don't actually talk on the phone anymore.
Right?
It's like our AirPods are kind of the new phone.
It's the truth, right? But we do end up talking to our phone quite a bit. You do end up saying things like, hey, Siri, play this album, or hey, Siri, set a timer, or hey, Google, do this, or hey, Alexa, do that. And so it's interesting that we're not talking to other humans anymore. We're talking to our phones through conversational UIs. But as a programmer, I know that I can't just say to my phone, hey, Siri, do you remember that one movie that was out with that one actor and that other actor, and I really loved it, and then she's not going to understand these kind of very open-ended, vague questions. And so when you're in conversational UIs, you kind of realize you need to talk with a purpose. And so understanding even the nuances, the differences between talking to a computer and talking to a human, just make it interesting.
What do you think of talking to AI?
I think it's fascinating. Speech synthesis or text-to-speech has been around for decades. When Steve Jobs introduced the original Macintosh on stage back in 1984, he had the Macintosh speak. He said, oh, it's so good to be out of that bag. I'm so glad to be here and all these things. So speech synthesis is something that's been with us for quite some time, but it's only been in the last couple of years where speech recognition has come in. And that's just a fascinating new aspect of being a computer programmer, because you can't be limited in what you hear from a user as they're talking to you. You need to be able to say, hey, Siri, play this album, or hey, Siri, play this song, or hey, Siri, play this artist, or this playlist, and so there's a lot more nuance in a conversational UI that's trying to recognize what you're saying, because the human language is so rich. There's so many different ways to express yourself. The computer recognition, the speech recognition, has to account for all of those nuances.
So do you think AI is kind of going to fill that gap and make speech more possible with the nuances?
I really do. I really do. The current way we talk to computers, we have a very limited what's called bounded grammar. They're just very few words that you can use. Set a timer, or play a song, or turn on the lights. They're very narrow set of verbs.
Programming.
Yeah, very programming. And what AI is allowing us to do with generative AI is we do get to be more conversational. And I could say something like, oh, I was just in India and I had Mysore masala dosa for breakfast every morning, and I just love the cultural differences of India. What are some of the things you can tell me about India? What are some of the things that are different from India than Colorado, where I'm from? And so we can be more open in the way we talk to computers, and our expectation is we'll get more open, more artistic, more fluent answers. So that's the next generation we're coming into. It'll be exciting.
Do you think we'll hit a wall where, like, there's still something which we can't do?
So it's funny because it's not magic to me. I know that there are humans behind the scenes building these kinds of things, and so you do understand the subtle nuances and the limitations of the technology. I don't think that we're anywhere close to true intelligence. I prefer machine learning. I think that's a much better job of that. But if I show a machine 1 million images of breast cancer, that's machine learning. And so when I start showing it new images of X-rays, and it can detect cancer in there and everything, that's wonderful. And I almost would prefer that level of technology than, hey, Siri, tell me a good joke.
Actually, I agree with you. Like, if we teach the computer and we kind of get out what we expect.
Yes. But the conversational UI, the speech, is just another way to interact with the computers. A lot of what I talk about is multi-sensory architecture, and that computing now really needs to touch all of your senses. It can't be just one-dimensional. And so if you can read something on the screen, can you hear it as well? If you can type something on a keyboard, can you say it as well? And so what I love is we're moving into a new era of sophistication in computing where it's not one-dimensional, where you have to type commands in all uppercase at a command line. You know, we can bring more nuance in, and I can talk to the computer when it's convenient. If I'm making bread and my hands are covered with dough, I want to be able to say, hey, Siri, set a timer for 20 minutes. And we're at the era now where I can, if I've got a timer going off, I can just hold out my hand and click my fingers in thin air. And so we're just discovering a whole new set of interfaces. And once I start doing gestures in thin air and computers can recognize it, that's what makes me feel like I'm living in the
maybe
future.
Technology is even getting to a point where we'll spend less time staring at a screen?
I would hope. I would really hope. VR goggles are kind of an interesting way because it's not only just you looking at the world, but it's a computer overlay of things. So I love that even Yelp on the iPhone, you can certainly search for individual restaurants and read reviews and things like that. Or you could just hold up your iPhone and look down the street, and Yelp reviews will pop up over each one of the restaurants, and you can say, oh, wow, that restaurant is so close to me, and it's got a bunch of 4-star reviews and everything. That's a lot different than typing in search criteria into a computer system, It's holding up a camera and looking at my surroundings and understanding the context and reacting to that. That's what I think is going to be really exciting about this next generation of computing.
Yeah, because right now we kind of trained ourselves to learn how to read a map.
Yeah.
Hopefully we can kind of like connect the digital and real world more.
Exactly. And like Google Maps came out in 2004. I was working on Google Maps originally, not with Google, but for a satellite imagery provider. And it's amazing to think that I used to drive without a GPS. I mean, it's amazing to think that as I traveled from city to city, I'd have to do research and I'd have to buy paper maps and I'd have to plan my route from the airport to the hotel and the hotel to the conference venue and things. And now I can just kind of show up in a city unprepared and I can almost say, hey, Siri, how do I get to my hotel? So excuse me, but yeah, it's just interesting how computing is getting more sophisticated, which allows me to be less sophisticated as I interact with computers.
I can see that. Do you want to talk a little bit about the accessibility in your talk?
Yes. So I'm giving a keynote tomorrow, digital modernization through accessibility. And so many times people look at accessibility and they even say the word accessibility, but they hear the word disability.
I could definitely see that.
Right? I had a keynote that I gave years ago called It Spelled Accessibility, Not Disability. I really tried to address that up front. But if we think about all the ways we're interacting with computers now, as I'm talking to a computer, if I had limited mobility, that might be the primary way I talk to a computer. Or if my speech is limited or unintelligible, I might have to type with a computer. I might have to begin doing these kinds of gestures. So I take a very yes and approach to digital accessibility. Yes, it's for our blind and low vision users. Yes, it's for our deaf and hard of hearing users. Yes, and 25% of the world has some form of disability. This is not a small market segment. If you have a disability, any disability, you're a member of the largest minority in the world. There are over 1 billion people worldwide that have a disability. So imagine a country the size of China. Imagine a country the size of India, and it gives you an idea of the number of people with disabilities in the world. But while this technology is important for people who have limitations in any one of their senses or a combination of their senses, what I love is you and I are using these same senses to interact with our phones. So as I said, when I'm cooking, I love making sourdough. If my hands are covered with dough, I want to use my voice. If I've got an alarm go off, I want to tap in midair. Sometimes it really is easier just to tap on my watch and start a timer again. So what I want is the ability to use all my senses and for me to be able to choose. And I think for people with disabilities, that's all they want as well, is to have a multi-sensory approach to how they interact with the computers and not be limited to any one sensor, any one input modality.
So you think like maybe more companies would build applications which use lots of senses if they sold it for convenience, and it would also happen to fulfill the needs for the accessibility?
Yeah. So I was working for a client and they were getting ready to roll out a new catalog of 20,000 items that they were trying to sell online. And I said, well, we need to have alt text on each one of those images. We need to have words that describe what's in this image. So if you're selling a baseball hat with a green tractor on it, you need to have alt text on there that says a baseball hat with a green tractor on it. And so for people who have blindness or low vision, they won't be able to see the image, but they'll be able to hear the alt text and be able to make an informed purchasing decision. So this is the yes and approach to accessibility. Yes, we need alt text for all of our blind and low vision users. And we need alt text for the rest of the users as well. Because how do you think someone is going to search for a baseball hat with a green tractor on it? They're going to go to a search engine and type in those words, baseball hat with a green tractor on it. So all of a sudden, accessibility is also related to search engine optimization. It's related to your sales goals and your marketing goals. And so what I really try to talk about with my clients is we don't need to thin slice accessibility. We don't need to narrow our focus on that and put it to the side. What we need to do is realize that all of your customers have a variety of senses and they want to use all of their senses. And so, yes, accessibility is so important for that 25% of your customer base that has a disability. And it's important for the other 75% as well.
I think this is so important, and I'm really happy that you're going to reach out to so many people.
Oh, thank you so much. It's something that's just so near and dear to my heart. It's just, it's a joy to talk about.
It's been really lovely talking to you, Scott.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure meeting you.
Thank you.